Good morning and welcome to the February meeting of the Planning Committee. My name is Councillor Jonathan Vinehall, Chairman of the Planning Committee. This meeting is being held remotely and is being live streamed via YouTube, and the recording of it will be available afterwards on our website. Councillors and officers are reminded to put their mobile phones on silent if they have one near them. Committee members only leave their cameras on and mute their microphones when not speaking, as this will reduce feedback and background noise and saves bandwidth to prevent the loss of connection. Firstly, I will do a roll call to check the members who are expected to attend are present. So as I say your names, please turn your microphone on and confirm you are connected. Councillor Mary Barnes.
Present.
Councillor Sam Coleman.
Present.
Councillor Gary Curtis.
Present.
Councillor Sarah Errington.
Present.
Councillor Brian Drayson.
Present.
Councillor Tony Ganley.
Present.
Councillor Kathy Harmer.
Present.
Councillor Jonathan Johnston.
Present.
Councillor Chris Madeley.
Present.
Councillor Andrew Mear.
Present.
Councillor Howard Norton.
Present.
Councillor Sue Prochak.
Present.
Councillor Hazel Tempe.
Present.
And Councillor John Barnes, who is substituting for Councillor Stevens.
Present.
I believe Councillor Richard Thomas is also with us today. You may like to, although he's not acting on the committee. Are there any other councillors with us today? Councillor Eleanor Kirby-Green?
Yep, present.
Are there any other councillors who wish to be recorded as present? No?
Lynn Langlands.
Councillor Lynn Langlands, who is also a substitute but not on the committee today. Thank you, Lynn. And the officers joining us today are Tim Hickling, who's the Head of Strategy and Planning, Sam Batchelor, the Development Manager, Sarah Shepherd, the Development Manager and Team Leader. Democratic Services Officer and Committee Clerk today is Julie Holland. The members of the committee will be making the decisions today by a named vote. And because of this format, should a member lose connection, I'll stop the meeting for 2 minutes to enable the connection to be restored. If your connection can't be restored within 2 minutes, the meeting will proceed and you will not be allowed to vote. Should you lose connection during an application, I expect you to advise such when it comes to the vote. Those members wishing to speak, please indicate by typing your surname only in the chat facility. Please do not use the chat facility for any other purpose, with the minor exception of identifying if you think somebody may have frozen or can't hear them. Speakers either for or against an application and the parish and town council representatives have the opportunity to register to speak, and I will call speakers after the officers have presented the application, and there will be an opportunity for members to ask questions of the speakers. Members wishing to ask questions of the speaker should indicate this to me via the chat facility by typing the surname only, and I will call members generally in order that they put their name up. Should this section be problematic or it's too repetitious, I will limit the questions to the speakers, and I would just remind everyone, I'd remind speakers to only raise subjects which are already on the planning file, and also members not to ask technical questions of the speakers. They should be directed towards the officers. When asking questions of the speakers, it's really about what the speaker has presented. If necessary, we'll stop for a comfort break, and we will do that just as required. So on that basis, I'm going to move to the first item on the agenda, which is to ask the committee to authorise myself to sign the minutes of the meeting of the 14th of January as a correct record of the meeting.
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We have apologies from Jeanette Stevens. Julie, do we have any other apologies?
No, we have no other apologies, and Councillor John Barnes is standing in as Councillor Stevens' substitute today.
Thank you very much. And do we have any additional items that have been introduced to the agenda?
No, there are none.
And any withdrawn applications?
No, there's none.
Good. Do we have any disclosures of interest today? Anyone disclosing interests? No? All right. Thank you very much. If you do feel you have a disclosure as a application arises, please just let me know. You can see the planning application list, so we will move straight on to the first application. I recognise this may take a little time because it's an application for land that's been heard on a number of occasions before, different applications, and that is RR 2020-1822/P, which is Strand Meadow and the land to the southwest of that road. So I'm going to ask the Officer Sarah Shepherd to present the application.
Yes, good morning, councillors and members of the public. As you say, the first application is for Strand Meadow. You have a full report before you, but I would draw certain points to your attention. This application relates to an area of land at the southern end of Strand Meadow. Many of you have already visited the site on previous occasions, but others visited the site unaccompanied on Tuesday this week. The land is situated within the development boundary for Burwash, has been allocated for housing, landscaping and recreation since 2006 and has already had outline permission granted in March 2018, subject to conditions under Section 106. As such, the principle of the development for no more than 30 dwellings has already been accepted by the Planning Committee. The subsequent full application, which was submitted later in 2018-19, was refused on design grounds, with a new Section 106 being completed during the appeal process. The appeal was dismissed, and that 106 only applied to that application. This application seeks consideration of reserved matters, namely appearance, landscaping, layout and scale, and it's in respect of the outline permission. Access via Strand Meadow has already been approved as part of the outline permission, along with off-site highway works, which are part of the Section 106 and which seek, at the request of the Highway Authority, the provision of the parking lay-by, which you can see on the plan here, at the end of Strand Meadow. That parking is for existing residents and would thereby create a two-way width carriageway at the end of Strand Meadow. You may have noticed at your visit that people currently park on the road there now, and it thus restricts the width of available space for moving vehicles to traverse along the road. Drainage, parking and turning facilities were also requested via conditions to be submitted as part of the reserved matters application. The applicant has chosen to also submit condition details in respect of archaeology, levels and further landscaping. Requirements set out in other conditions and as part of the Section 106, including affordable housing, are not submitted at this stage. As accepted by the appeal inspector, with regard to the full application, the layout proposed is linear and along the lower slopes of the site, stepping up with the contours, but remaining below the surrounding development of Beechwood Close and Rotherview. Beechwood, you have Strand Meadow here. Beechwood Close is slightly to the northeast here, and then Rotherview is to the southeast of the developable area. And then the recreation ground, obviously, off of Ham Lane is at the very southern end of the site where the public amenity and recreation space would be. The design and appearance has seen a significant transformation. New architects have been working on the scheme. They are the same architects that developed the scheme for the old rectory site in the High Street and the passive house development in Shrub Lane. The scheme has been the subject of public consultation and discussion with the Parish Council, and the applicant sought a peer review. As can be seen, the design now follows the local vernacular, taking its cues from the historic core of the village rather than the surrounding late 20th century housing. The scale of the dwellings is reduced to traditional two-storey, with a mix of hips and gable roofs with chimneys, and presents a varied roofscape. The heights have been reduced along with the depth of underbuild, thus reducing steps and incorporating a greater degree of hard and soft landscaping. Existing field boundary planting to the edges of all 3 fields is to be retained and enhanced, which you may have noticed on the previous plans here, where we have the existing field boundary through here between, and again the existing field boundary at the end separating the public amenity space. As members will have seen at the site visits, the site sits within a small valley, screened from the surrounding wider views by the natural level changes and vegetation. The adjacent public footpath to the west, behind the far hedge of the adjacent field, is at a higher level and would naturally be expected to have some views of the site, especially the roofscape. However, such local impacts would not result in wider harmful impacts to the AONB. The details as submitted have been accepted, and the following have raised no objections to the proposals subject to conditions. And those are the Highway Authority, the County Rights of Way Officer, County Landscape Officer, County Ecologist, the Lead Local Flood Authority, County Archaeologist, Environment Agency, Southern Water, the Housing Officer and the Police. These are just a few more of the examples. That's the terrace that would be stepping up the hill. And that's the last house on plot 30, which is the only detached property. As well as members visiting the site, short videos have also been made. There are 4 videos in total. The first is taken at the entrance to the site at the end of Strand Meadow. The second is within the northern field, and it's approximately where I've put the number on the plan there, so it's sort of standing at the back of the houses. The third is in the southern field, again in the location of one of the properties, and the last one is taken at the bottom of the gill where the pond is proposed. And I will now play the videos for you.
This view is from the entrance of the site back down Strand Meadow, firstly showing the area where parking bays will be constructed as part of the Section 106. Looking down to the original terrace and coming around back into the site. Looking down now to where the access track will run in front of us, and on the right hand side where the parking will be, showing the gully and the field beyond. Coming back to the left, this is the area where the first set of houses will be located. Now standing in the centre of the northern section of the site, looking at the end of the existing row of terraces in Strand Meadow, moving down to the left where the access is, and gradually around at the bottom of the site where the parking and access road will be. You can see in the distance of the top of the opposite field the hedgerow beyond which is the footpath, and as we move around to the left of the site we can see the other side of the hedgerow beyond which is the southern part of the site. As we move up the hill, there is the low plastic fence which broadly defines the limit of the residential properties, and beyond which is the remaining field. We can see the ends of 2 or 3 bungalows in the adjoining properties, and coming back to the end of Strand Meadow. We are now standing in the southern section of the development and looking at the hedge which borders the northern section. It's coming around and down the field, which will come to where the access road will be, and finally at the point that you're looking at now, at the bottom where there will be a pond. As we move around, you can see in the distance the hedgerow at the top of the field opposite, beyond which is the footpath. As we move around, you will see where the access road will continue, and ultimately in the distance, the hedgerow, which is the furthest point of the built development, beyond which is the recreation area. Directly in front of us will be the terraced area, and beyond that, the final houses in the development. Looking up the field, you'll see the grey plastic fence, the very low grey plastic fence, and the houses above. This view shows the site from the southern section back towards the entrance along the bottom edge where the parking will be, and the access road to the right. In the foreground is a stream which is currently running, and that will run down to the pond shown on the plans in the hedgerow.
That's the videos. Now, as a result of the members' visit on Tuesday, a number of questions have been raised, and I'd just like to address those for you now. There's a question about affordable homes. Why is this 106 not to be considered with this application? What triggers the 106 agreement? When will the issue of viability be addressed? The affordable housing and viability are not raised as issues within the reserved matters. The Section 106 requires details prior to commencement. They have 2 years in which to commence a development following the grant of a last of our reserved matters matter. The developer has not raised issue of viability with this application. I've noted that the seal form references social housing and they have completed the relevant exemption form. So there is no reason for us to assume that they are not doing it. Members have not seen the 106 agreement that was signed as part of the previous refusal. That 106 agreement is not relevant to this outline application and the reserved matters. It's the Section 106 attached to the outline permission that is the consideration here moving forward. A query about mobility issues and pushchairs. The numbers of steps have been reduced and they are the same as elsewhere within the area. The previous appeal inspector did comment that the topography of the site is steep and the evidence before me would suggest that stepped access is probably unavoidable and is in fact quite common locally. The appellant has referred to the requirements of Part M41 of the building regulations as the material consideration. The inspector said that this indicates that a stepped approach can be used on steeply sloping sites subject to several detailed design matters, including design and spacing of steps and landings. There is nothing of substance before me to suggest that the requirements of Part 4M1 could not be met. On balance, and given the inherent constraints of the site, stepped access would be an acceptable in your report before you, and you can see those items at paragraphs 8.8.3 and 8.8.4. The issues about affordable housing and viability are also addressed in the report at paragraphs 8.5 and 8.6. With regard to soil from the development, the developers have stated that their intention is that soil removal would be minimal and that they would deal with cut and fill, which is seen on the section details, and this is also covered in the ecological conditions that were recommended by the county ecologist. The number of dwellings on the site is subject to form and scale, which is created by the design, and all those considerations have been set out at various points in the report. The county ecologist would be consulted on any ecological details. Obviously, they have recommended conditions. Those conditions are in the report before you, and the ecologist would be consulted on subsequent details to discharge any conditions. At present, the scheme does propose to be unadopted roads with no street lighting. There is actually a condition, number 22 on the outline consent, which specifies that there should be no street lighting unless highways require any or a scheme is first approved. The land behind the gardens, there's a query about that. As you can see on the plan, there is a large area of land that runs to the rear of all the gardens. That land is a landscape buffer to be used for ecology purposes as well as further landscaping. It's as per the policy, the conditions on the previous outline, and it's also specified in the section 106, and that's commented on at paragraph 3.2 of the report. Lastly, there was a query about allotments, how they would be managed if the parish council did no longer required them. The paragraph 8.17.3 and 8.10.7 in the report explains that the plans show the land to the end as being recreational land, in this case of indicated community orchard amenity space. The allotments are set out to be provided if the parish require them within the section 106 agreement. If the parish do not wish to take on the allotments, then that area of public open space would be retained by the developer management company and would be managed by that management company. That's all the comments that I have for you at this stage. We have had a further submission by the Burwash Save Our Fields group. I believe that their comments were circulated directly to members over the weekend. It does not appear to us, having looked at this document, which we only as officers received late yesterday afternoon, does not appear that there are any issues raised which are material to the considerations that are already set out in the report, and they do not change the recommendation of the report. The recommendation before you is for approval with conditions.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Thank you. Councillor Tempe, you put your hand up to speak, but I would normally have the town and parishes speak now. Is it a question for Sarah?
Yeah, it was a question for Sarah, but I can wait. It's fine.
If you could hold it till we do this.
Sorry, John.
No, that's absolutely fine. No problem at all. Thank you for putting your name in early, and we've got that registered. So I'm now going to ask Councillor Anne Newson from the Burwash Parish Council to speak. Are you with us, Anne? If you could turn your camera and microphone on.
My camera is on. Can you see me?
Yes, we can see you now. Thank you very much, and we can hear you. So you've got 5 minutes. And,
very much. Okay. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on behalf of the Parish Council and community of Burwash. This is the 5th time in 4 years that the community has turned out in huge numbers to register overwhelming opposition to build 30 units on this site. I asked the committee as elected representatives to refuse this application today and draw a line definitively under a series of proposals that has plagued this site, blighted the lives of local residents for years, and represents a scandalous waste of time and public money. Conditions 1, 2, 3 together relate to the access, appearance, hard and soft landscaping, layout and scale of a site. Here is your reason for refusal. The proposal is materially the same as the one you refused in January 2019 and was turned down on appeal by the inspector. The inspector's report said, notwithstanding the allocation, the design and scale of the buildings now proposed, which would harm the landscape, has not previously been approved. So we are back at square one, and the quality of the design is an improvement. We respect the work of the architect, but that emphatically does not overcome the issue of harm to the AONB. We run the risk of fixating on the type of icing being used, not the cake. So please do not be distracted by the superficial or cosmetic aspects of the drawings, the comparison with the last shocker of a design, or the bizarre and fanciful fairy tale illustrations of the peer review. They jar painfully against the powerful and real, outstanding natural beauty of the countryside that they would destroy. This proposal absolutely does not resolve the harmful impact of 30 homes. It is urban in form and layout, with hard landscaping for 60 cars, a surface footpath with steps. The new right-angled street running higher up into the hill increases visibility and negates attempts to reduce roof lines elsewhere. Frankly, and I do sympathise with the architect, honestly, however you dress these houses up, the development remains tightly packed, terraced and urban. The problem is the cake, not the icing. The inspector quoted and relied on the high-wheeled unit's objections. I note that Mrs. Shepherd has not referred to those today in her report. I'm quite disappointed that they haven't been referenced. They are very important. He said, he quoted them, "It is the massed appearance of the development, the hard landscaping, layout and scale of the site that remains both inappropriate and harmful to the AONB edge of village and the surrounding rural setting." He also noted, although in relation to the earlier proposal, please consider his words in the context of this application, a harmful and locally prominent suburban intrusion into the landscape of the AONB. Screening, sheltering, this cannot be used as a defence to inflict intrinsic damage to the AONB. We also have concern about the use of the reserved matters application. It allows the applicant to tick off conditions, which is quite normal, but here, this is happening in the knowledge that two major obligations in the Section 106, the 40% affordable housing and the footpath link, will not be met. And here's the thing, we have to go through the pretence, but they're still deliverable because they are not reserved matters. The applicant's agent confirmed to the parish council at a meeting in 2019 when presenting this new scheme that there will be no affordable housing, and also that they do not need to do any more than take a footpath to the boundary. Now that's their interpretation of the Section 106 requirement to provide a gate, ramp or steps connecting without interruption the residential site and the recreation ground. The only circumstances in which this, let's call it sacrifice of the AONB by increasing the number of units could ever have been considered, and please note that the parish council made it clear that 30 units would inevitably harm the AONB, could have been the promised delivery of affordable housing. To exclude these affordables would have been a deal breaker. And now the stage is set whereby the original decision is virtually unrecognisable and the planning committee is not allowed to consider this. But whilst we may see this as a travesty, the overriding fact for you to consider is that the application must be refused on the grounds of the harm that it will do to the AONB. Let me remind you of the irreparable damage posed to the precious ecology of the site. Part of the nationally scarce acid flushes have already been dug up ahead of construction and may now be destroyed. Please imagine the threat to the dark skies of the parish if police recommendations for security lighting throughout the estate and the walkways are implemented. There goes the High Wheels Units project to create a dark skies reserve. If you can find any public, ecological, environmental or social benefit in this scheme, we await your comments. From here, we see simply a tick off of centrally imposed housing targets and profit for the developer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Newson. I do have Councillor Kempe, and I'm going to hold you to when we're talking to Sarah, if that's okay. Just to reassure Councillor Kirby Green, yes, I will be asking you to speak after the applicant submission, and I have Councillor John Barnes. Did you want to ask a question of Councillor Newson?
No, I don't. I put him in my name to speak after Councillor Kirby Green.
All right, I'll hold you to that. Would anyone like to ask a question of Councillor Newson? I think you stated your case very eloquently and articulately, so thank you very much. I don't think we have questions, so please stay in the meeting. And just to remind those speaking, when we do get to the point of making a decision, I'll be asking you to leave the meeting at that point, but you can pick up if you want to watch the rest of the committee meeting. So I'm going to ask Robert Banks to come forward, and if you could turn your camera and your microphone on, and Sarah, if you could be ready with that page of the report that we spoke about earlier. So you have 5 minutes, Robert Banks. Please start when you would like to. Would you like that sheet up now?
Can I wait?
Yes.
Well, good morning, councillors, and can I thank Jonathan for making the speakers so welcome. I speak for Burwash Save Our Fields, a group who seeks to help the local community in our parish. The group wants the right housing in the right place. At the moment, we're supporting housing on 3 brownfield sites in the parish, which collectively would create more homes built there than the 30 in this application. 2 have reached planning stage, and we've been given detailed advice to the developers, which has been, in both cases, broadly accepted. In the 3rd case, we look forward to helping the developer in the same way. Now to Watercress Field, which is the site's true name. When decisions have to be taken, whether they're in business, government, planning or personal affairs, it's often helpful to distill the core issues. Once these are identified, such sub-issues are more easily addressed. This application cries out for such an approach. Core issue 1. Will the current designs have an adverse impact on the AONOB? The sub-issue is, are the new designs significantly different from the previous rejected designs, which were so emphatically held to have an adverse impact on the AONOB? The first house has been moved down the site. The last house has been moved up the site. The terrace block is placed up the slope, making those houses higher. The height difference between the old and the new are, as I put in the submission, piffling. As the inspector noticed, and you saw on the video, the trees and the scrub relied on by the developer are deciduous, making any development starkly visible in winter. So, is the developments the same? Well, when the inspector's view and the planning committee's view is considered, that means, as they are the same, you should uphold your decision and the inspector's decision. Core issue 2. Should the developer be able to score a tactical advantage by splitting up his application? We sketch this approach at para 8 of our main submission. The splits are the conditions in this application, the affordable issues, the footpath undertaking and the final conditions. Well, you remember my analogy about the asking permission for the roof and the 2nd floor and leaving the rest for later. Well, if you think the applications should be considered and you think you are being manipulated for a favourable result, not only do you have the option to refuse the application, you have a duty to do so. So what does the developer say to that? He says we choose what we put before the planning committee. Maybe so, but it is no answer to the desirability of having all the matters considered at once, especially as the developer says he will be presenting new applications before the March 2021 deadline. It also doesn't deal with the manipulation. Now, we've heard from Sarah that you should assume that the affordables are there. Well, that's part of the conjuring trick. There is an email, and it's one of the documents I offered. You can see it if you wish, where the developer makes clear that he is going to make the application for affordables very soon. And no doubt, where that's drafted, it will include the footpath. Core issue 3. Does the access in condition 1 include the footpath access. Your task as decision makers is to give the words their ordinary natural meaning. With that in mind, it clearly does. So what does the developer say? He says it's all been already dealt with, and the footpath access cannot be considered as it's off-site. The first part doesn't deal with the issue, and the second part misunderstands the rules about conditions. Clearly, a condition cannot make an order about a neighbour who is not a party to the application. However, that principle does not apply here. Most, if not all, applications for housing estates have considerations about access. Access will invariably be about issues off-site. This has happened here already about vehicular access. Orders have been made about the changes to Strand Meadow, which are off-site. Also, considerations of local traffic need to be made. They will inevitably be off-site.
Robert, I have to say that you're right on your 5 minutes.
Oh, I'm very sorry. I've got
I know you
I've got about a minute to go. Could I have it?
You can.
The problem is you time these things.
That's why they're 5 minutes.
When you're speaking at a meeting, it becomes much more difficult to speak quickly because you can't speak in the same way as you would when you're addressing a friend in a room. So
I'll give you one. I will give you a minute to round up, but it probably means you're missing your slide.
Well, that is very grateful. I'm very grateful. Thank you very much. So the footpath needs to be sustainable. You need the footpath for sustainability, and it will inevitably be partly off-site. And I should concentrate on the sustainability and the footpath. Core issue 3, can the developer satisfy the access conditions in condition 1? And the answer is no. And could I then now see the ecologist report, please?
Very quickly.
Now, do you see there, it says that whilst the application, do you see that bit in the box? I'll carry on while you read it to speed up. Now, if the ecologist can't be satisfied, I don't see you can be. So that means all the draft conditions, all these conditions must be refused because if ecology is in order, they apply to all conditions. And lastly, can I say that rather approve the draft plan, knowing that this site, the draft neighbourhood plan, knowing that this site was not to be included. Please be consistent. Their decision was deliberate and correct. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I have a question from John Barnes. I'm presuming it's on to Robert Banks, yes?
Yes, Chairman, I wanted to ask Robert Banks. He referred to the splitting up of the application. I wonder if he could just elaborate what he means by that.
I think he did elaborate quite well, John, but if you will give him one more shot, but don't take too long at it, Robert, because I think
let me ask
pretty well.
let me ask my other question too at the same time, so that it can be wrapped up. You referred also to an application from the developer, which is promised in a letter to the parish council. Was that to discharge the obligation for affordable housing, or was it to build the affordable housing?
Thank you very much. Councillor Barnes, can I deal with your first part? It really is about manipulation, which I referred to. Nobody making decisions for the public, whether they be the courts, the tribunals, or planning, should ever be allowed to be a party to manipulate or misuse its procedures. Suppose someone seeks to use the civil court to intimidate a neighbour rather than obtain damages. Everybody involved will ensure that that doesn't happen. The same is true here. If you think he's trying to gain a tactical advantage by keeping the affordables and the footpath off the table so that you then have ticks to the applications when they're not considered a whole, that is something that you should guard your procedures against. And as a result, he should not be allowed to be in a better position, and the remedy is easy. Say no.
All right. No, thank you for that.
Oh, one extra thing. Can I say that in relation to the manipulation, the district valuer is correct in saying that he's quite satisfied that the developer knew all about the abnormal conditions and the reasons for the viability when he promised the 40% and also when he promised the affordable houses and the 30 houses. Now, can you, Councillor Barnes, can you remind me what your second question was?
I think you covered the questions, didn't you? I think some of the questions, John, you're asking are of a technical nature and should really be directed to the officers, which we can do as we go along. If you could hold those, it's very one has to be very careful to ask technical questions of a speaker because they're not.
This is not a technical question. If I remind you, Mr. Banks referred to a letter to the parish council in which he spoke of, and it wasn't clear from what Mr. Banks was saying, whether this referred to the affordable housing. I wasn't clear what the letter said, whether it was to discharge that obligation or what the application was going to be.
Yes, this is the email that was sent on the 11th, which is one of the documents I asked to be able to put up during my slot, and I was told I was not allowed to because that's prohibitive. But if you ask a question and the chairman wants to see this email, that can be arranged.
Well,
because I can read it to you, but it doesn't. I can read it to you, but it's very strangely phrased. What he says is, and he says that prior to the commencement of the development, it will also needs to be You see, it's such a long sentence. I'll have to read it in full.
If you can just hold the thought there for a minute, because I think this got caught up with the issue with your document coming in. Unfortunately, it went into a sort of a COVID quarantine, which is why the planners didn't think they'd received it. Just hold the thought there for a minute. Sarah, do we have a copy of that email available that could be put up? If so, if you need to wait for a minute, we can just bring it in a few minutes.
Sorry, Councillor Vinehall, I am not aware of the email that Mr. Banks is referring to.
Okay. Well, I'm afraid you're just going to have to read it out and hope we can cope with it.
Well, I wonder if having introduced and talked to Claire about it, if she was to go and see the list of documents, I could put it on. She could be able to put it on the screen, hopefully within a few seconds.
Well, I'm not sure it's been loaded up in a format that can be loaded up. I think if you just read it.
I'm happy if it's read out.
Just read it out, please, Robert, and we will all concentrate.
In the event that this application is granted, before the consent can be implemented, within the timescale set out in condition 4, the other planning conditions requiring the submission of details prior to the commencement of the development will also need to be discharged, as will the requirements of the planning obligation, which includes provisions for affordable housing. So before the date, he is going to make an application, the March date, he's going to make an application to remove the affordable houses and the other conditions that he can't meet.
Okay. No, thank you, Robert, and we will discuss this point. I think I'm going to hold you there because that is something that we need to discuss when we move on with the officers. So we will John will, I'm sure, will raise this issue with the officers for a response to that question. All right. So we will get a.
Yes, but if you want to.
Okay, we will get a.
If you want for me to show where I showed Claire the document is, when we were discussing how to put it up,
that's all right.
I can do that.
I think we've all got the gist of that. So we understand what you're saying, and I will ask the officer to respond to that. Well, Sarah, would you like to respond to that now to make it easy? Would you just respond to that?
Okay, yes. Everybody seems to be under a misapprehension. The reserved matters needed to be submitted by the date in March that to comply with the condition. That is only a submission of the reserved matters. Issuing a decision on the reserved matters can occur after that March date, and actually they have a further 2 years after approval of reserved matters in which to commence development as set out in the conditions of the outline. So they then, even if you decided to grant permission today, the applicant would have a further 2 years in which to discharge other conditions and the Section 106 agreement before commencing on site.
All right, so you mightn't like the answer, but that's the answer. Councillor Ganley.
Thank you. A question for Mr. Banks. Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Banks. It seems to me fairly clear from what is being said and what the developer has said is that no affordable houses are going to be built. Would you agree?
Definitely. He's made that emphatically clear, and he's still relying on his viability. And these are matters which would be, I say with the greatest respect, centre stage for your development, whatever attempts are made to try and take them off the table. Because to consider a application for houses in stages to assist the developer would terribly let down those who seek to protect our environment and the local community.
And I appreciate what you're saying, Robert, and it is very frustrating for the committees when presented with these applications, when we believe that something else might be happening, or we would have liked everything to come forward. But the affordable housing is a Section 106 matter, and Sarah will cover this again. I think we've heard the points that you've made, and very, very clearly. And I'm sure.
Well, before we leave the matter, can I say
no, you can't.
The committee should not open itself to judicial review proceedings.
I'm asking you to stop talking now. Yeah, your slot is finished. I'm not asking you a question for a response. What I'm saying to you is that I'll ask the officers to respond to this specific question when we are having a discussion, but you have to appreciate what this application is, and members will consider the points that you've made. It's not for you to sort of be part of the argument or the discussion when that happens. So, Mary Barnes, did you have a question for Robert Banks?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Mr. Banks, the last time round, I commented on the huge number of steps. And I see this time that the developer is planning steps inside the houses as well as outside the houses. But I was concerned last time about accessibility in the gardens. Were you able to divine whether there is actually going to be steps in the gardens as well? And are the gardens on slopes? Because, I mean, we all visited the site. We could see how very hilly it was. Do you think that the gardens are going to be sloping as well? That's part of my question. And the other bit is, without the footpath going all the way through to the village, and I know this is an illegal question, really, is this site sustainable?
Well, hang on a second. Just stop the discussion, please, Mary. That is not an appropriate question to ask Robert Banks. He didn't cover a number of the issues that you just raised. They are questions for the officers, and I appreciate I appreciate you want the answers to them, but they are questions for the officers and then for discussion of the committee. Robert did not raise most of the things that you just raised.
Right on that.
I'll accept that.
So please accept that. So
I'll accept that. Okay,
I'm not allowing that question. It's just not right. You know, please keep to the protocol of this. I appreciate that this is a slightly emotive site, but please don't use the presenters as ways to introduce subjects which should be introduced to the officers and discussed with the committee. So does anyone else have a question on the matters that Robert has raised?
Chairman, I consider myself told off. Sorry.
That's all right. I know these things are very tempting, and I appreciate and apologise if I have to be a little firm on them. So if that's the case, I thank you very much, Robert. You presented very well, and drawing our attention to all the issues that the committee has to consider and difficulties we face. So if you'd like to turn your camera and microphone off, and if I could have Martin Wright, please.
Okay, yes, can you see and hear me?
We can just about.
Okay, sorry, my internet.
I can't see you, but I can hear you. Can everyone see Martin? Well, your video hasn't come through, but you can speak without that if you'd like.
Okay, all right. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. So am I clear to start?
We can see you now. Yes, please.
Oh, brilliant. Okay, so hello and good morning. So I'm a resident of Strand Meadow, and I have been for 24 years. My wife and I moved to Burwash in 1997, and we were immediately struck by the beauty of the surrounding areas. We're particularly fortunate actually in Strand Meadow as we have the ancient woodlands to the back of us and some lovely public footpaths through this naturally beautiful area. And this natural beauty has never really been threatened until this series of applications to build on watercress fields. So I want to make 3 points, if I may. The first point deals with how this development will spoil a part of the AONB. A recent planning inspector said it would harm the character and the appearance of the AONB, and my neighbours and I agree. We made a choice to live in an area of outstanding natural beauty, which, by definition, is supposed to conserve and protect the landscape. We all enjoy the trees and the wildlife and the surrounding fields and the open views, and we fear this will soon be destroyed by a housing development within the AONB, which is too large, too urban, and frankly, too densely packed. Local people here feel as if there's an overriding desire by planners and developers to encroach onto the AONB whenever they feel like it, with the excuse of, well, we must build houses somewhere. This attitude we feel is flawed because there are other places to build, and I actually know of 3 other sites in Burwash and Burwash Weald that are either in planning or under consideration, which don't encroach further into beautiful fields in the AONB. Destroying Watercress Field, as it's known locally, with all its wildlife, beauty and history, we feel is completely unnecessary. So I pose the question, where do we draw the line? The AONB is here for a reason. It must be respected. All development, whether inside or outside the development boundary, must be considered for its impact on the AONB. We feel this impact was not considered properly in 2017, but it was considered in the more recent failed application for this site last year. My second point concerns how this development will actually affect the people living in Strand Meadow. The proposed development is tightly packed, which will naturally result in an overflow of cars parked in the road. We already have cars here parked on pavements and on grass verges, and some houses in Strand Meadow don't even have a garage or a driveway, so on-street parking is already at a premium. Only the other day I was talking to a lady who is disabled down the road, and she relies on her car but often cannot park near to her house because parking spaces, even right now, are so much in demand. I'm concerned, and as are my fellow neighbours, that once the houses are occupied, parking will be considerably more difficult in Strand Meadow and the level of traffic will increase significantly. We feel that the Highways Authority hasn't paused to properly consider whether the extra traffic for residents and visitors and amenities and deliveries is in fact practical. This is a particularly important point as it deals with condition 1 of the Reserve Matters application now regarding access and scale of the site. My third and last point revolves again around the affordable housing, and I highlight this because affordable housing is something that matters to local residents a great deal. Burwash desperately needs the affordable housing, and house prices are at a point now where our children cannot afford their own houses when they desperately crave their independence. Many have grown up in the area in Burwash and now face the prospect of moving out of the area to seek cheaper housing elsewhere. The local residents feel cheated that we were promised 40% affordable housing on this site, only for that promise to be broken. The premise that the site is suddenly no longer viable is a lie, and the challenging topography hasn't changed. And the developer knew from the start that it would cost an extra amount of money to build on such a steep slope, which you all saw at the videos on the site visit. It should be noted that the district valuer also wasn't fooled by the suggestion that the site problems were known when the affordable home commitment was originally given. I'm just coming to the end now. So the residents feel that if the outline planning permission had been originally for 30 full price houses on this site, it would have been turned down immediately, as it was last year. The council at the time gave approval outline planning permission with the promise of affordable homes, and we all know that this was now a ploy, and it demonstrates a deceptive trait in Park Lane homes, which leaves the local residents very angry indeed. Overall, the residents feel that careful manoeuvring by Russell Beswick of Park Lane Homes could cause the destruction of an important ancient field in the AONB, and we respectively beg the council members to be very mindful of this, and I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Martin Wright. That was very well said, very well articulated. Do we have any questions on the matters raised by Mr. Wright? Yes, Councillor Errington.
Hi, thank you, Martin. Just a general question on the parking, and apologies for being so cynical perhaps, but I came to the site visit on Tuesday. Was the parking that we saw on Tuesday typical, and has it increased since COVID and more people perhaps working from home? Or were there cars there that perhaps wouldn't normally be there? I know you can't say that, but I have experience of this. So I just wondered, was that a typical day, and has it increased over the last year?
Well, thank you for your question. And I would say that the parking, well, obviously has increased down here during COVID, but it's not atypical of the amount of parking that you would normally see here at weekends and during the evenings. Unfortunately, a lot of the photographs that you might see on that have been submitted in the past are taken by highways officials who come down during the day on a Tuesday when everybody's at work in 2007, where there's like maybe one or two cars. But the stark reality actually is that if you come down the road in the evenings or at the weekends, it's actually difficult to find a parking space. And to turn around at the end of the road, and having extra cars as an overflow from the housing estate would actually make it a bit of a nightmare. And that's just my honest opinion.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have any other questions for Mr. Wright? No? Well, thank you very, very much for speaking today. As I said, you're all welcome to stay within the meeting until we finish this application. But if you could turn your video and your microphone off now, and I'm going to ask Sam Batchelor, who has volunteered to read the two statements from the applicant. I think one is the agent and one is the architect. So Sam, are you with us?
Point of order, Mr. Chairman. Can I just make a point?
You can.
The facility to address the planning committee is for speakers. I'm very much afraid we're creating a precedent here. We will not have the opportunity to question, presumably Mr. Pickup. I don't know who it was who was planning to speak, but I really don't think we should be doing this, because I think this is for something that could possibly happen in the future. And it's too easy for someone just to sort of submit a statement.
Well,
I really think on this occasion we should think very carefully.
I think I thank you very much for raising the issue, and there was some discussion about it, about whether this would be right, and I did ask whether they might do a video, which is used by other councils, and of course you can't question a video either. I think the planning committee in the past, over quite a long period of time, has read out statements from objectors or applicants or whatever, and you take it at face value, and you can challenge it in any way you want to. It's not ideal. It would have been nice for them to have come and presented. They are statements which are effectively on the planning file as well, so one has to take them at that. I think to give fairness and balance, I think it's reasonable to to listen to them. Perhaps we might want to have a discussion as to what our policy might be in the future on this. Point well raised. Thank you very much, Councillor Barnes. So, Sam, now this is not Sam's opinion as an officer. I think it should be made very clear he is reading statements prepared by the applicant and doing it just so there is we all hear it. Go on, Sam.
Thank you, Chairman. And if you don't mind, I'm going to turn off my video because otherwise it might look a bit strange just looking at a different screen and reading it. Is that okay?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, so the first comments are from the applicant's agent, Mr. Mike Pickup of Town and Country Planning Solutions Limited. You have in front of you a comprehensive planning committee report which explains the background to and the nature of this planning application. The Reserve Matters application follows the Council's granting of outline planning permission for residential development on the 7th of March 2018. Planning conditions 1 and 3 require the applicant to submit details of the access, appearance, hard and soft landscaping, layout and scale for the Council's approval within the 3 years of the date of the outline planning permission. The purpose of the application is therefore to seek the Council's approval of these Reserve Matters details within the required timescale. At the same time, the applicant is seeking to discharge other related planning conditions imposed on the outline consent that are associated with the Reserve Matters details. Access to the site via Strand Meadow has already been approved as part of the outline consent, but the current application includes the proposed access arrangements within the application site area. As the quantum of housing development has already been approved, this is also not a material consideration for the determination of the current application. There are other planning conditions that will need to be discharged in due course, but the submission of these details have different trigger points. The same is true of matters covered by the planning obligation associated with the outline consent. These are not therefore relevant planning considerations for the determination of the current application. The next speaker, Harry Grucott of the Schemes Architects, will explain how the proposed housing layout and design has evolved following the Council's previous refusal of a full planning application for 30 dwellings on the site. Although the subsequent appeal was dismissed, it is important to note that this related only to the proposed design. The current Reserve Matters application now takes account of and addresses the design concerns raised by the planning inspector. Previously, the design was influenced and led by the appearance and scale of the adjoining 3-storey housing in Strand Meadow. Both the Council and the inspector considered that this was the wrong design approach, however, and that this should instead focus upon one which was be more sympathetic to the traditional building style prevalent within the wider landscape of the A&B and within the historic core of Burwash. In acknowledging and accepting these concerns, the applicant appointed architects with a proven record of delivering successful housing schemes within both Burwash and the A&B generally. In addition, the applicant appointed specialist consultants to produce a landscape and visual impact assessment, as well as having the scheme peer reviewed by an independent and highly qualified Sussex-based architect. The peer review has not been influenced by either the applicant or scheme architects, and indeed amendments were made to the submitted scheme in light of the comments contained in the peer review. The Planning Inspectorate stated in his decision letter that the cumulative benefits of the proposal are notable matters in favour of the scheme, but most of them could also be achieved by a more sensitively designed addresses the design concerns raised and now reflects the traditional built character and vernacular of the village and that within the A&B generally. The responses the Council has received from formal consultees confirm that the proposed internal access, turning and parking arrangements are acceptable, as are the submitted details relating to archaeology and the proposed landscaping arrangements. For the reasons set out in the committee report, planning conditions can be imposed in relation to the protection of retained trees and the site's ecology. Formal consultee responses have also confirmed that the proposed foul and surface water drainage arrangements are acceptable in principle and that a planning condition can be imposed in relation to the specific surface water drainage details and a phased connection to the public sewer in relation to foul drainage. As required by the planning application, the proposed layout provides a footpath connection between the residential area and the site boundary with the adjoining recreation ground. It should be noted there is no planning condition application for the applicant to provide a footpath beyond the site boundary, and while the County Council's public rights of way officer has mentioned that a footpath connection across the recreation ground would be beneficial, this is not critical to the acceptability of the proposed site layout. This could not therefore amount to a valid reason for refusing the plan permission. As the inspector's previous concerns have now been fully addressed, and there are no other matters that could amount to a sustainable reason for refusal, this application should be approved in line with the recommendations of the Planning Committee report.
Thank you very much. And now you have one from the architect, I think.
I do. So these are the architects. MHA architects have been appointed by the applicant to prepare designs for 30 dwellings on the site at Strand Meadow. The brief given to us by the client was to produce a scheme that addressed the council's reasons for refusing the previous full application and the inspector's reasons when dismissing the subsequent appeal. The client afforded us freedom to explore the design and responded to the constraints and opportunities without being prescriptive on the outcome. We undertook site visits and surveys to enable a full appraisal of the physical characteristics of the site. This included extended walks into the adjoining countryside to enable a true understanding of the site's viability to and relationship with the wider A and B setting. The proposed scheme has also been informed by a comprehensive landscape and visual appraisal. We reviewed the planning history of the site, including the current outline consent for 30 units, the refused full planning application and the dismissed appeal. We noted that the number of units and access to the site had both been approved at the outline stage. The only issue, therefore, that needed addressing was the visual appearance of the approved homes, their layout, scale and setting, referencing the design character of the historic core of Burwash Village and the wider A and B, rather than the immediate context of Strand Meadow. MHA have delivered 2 successful developments within Burwash on Lane and on the High Street. We undertook detailed site reviews on both projects and have followed a similar, robust process on our scheme design for the site at Strand Meadow. The access to the site is as approved under the previous outline application. This access point therefore sets the baseline for all resultant levels across the site. The road and footpath layout adheres to acceptable gradients and provides a safe and well-considered access to every home, minimising the number of steps to front and rear entrances. It follows the site contours and this defines the linear form of the layout. The site's topography falls from Rotherview to the south and drops down to its lowest point at the connection to Strand Meadow on the northern boundary. The gradient varies across the site and runs gently along the northeastern boundary. The siting of the new dwellings at the bottom of the slope has 2 clear contextual benefits. Firstly, it sits well below the eye line of any views currently enjoyed by residents of Rotherview, and secondly, it enables the built form to nestle behind the existing northern boundary tree screen. Whilst the development does not need to be hidden from view, it will present a softer face to the open land to the north. The placing of built form to this area of the site also ensures that the new roof forms do not break the line of the horizon, with the existing dwellings to Rotherview being the key visual point in longer range views from the A and B to the north. The floor levels of the units have been carefully considered to optimise accessibility and reduce the extent of underbuild and to balance the level of cut into the slope for rear gardens. The inspector was clear that extending the existing built form of Strand Meadow was not an appropriate design solution. Instead, the inspector echoed the view of the council when concluding that the appearance of the new home should take their design cues from the traditional vernacular of buildings in Burwash High Street and the A&B generally. As part of the previous appeal, the applicant commissioned a photographic survey of the High Street. This presented a mix of 2-storey forms with a predominance for upper storey tile hanging chimneys, some full brick facades and plain tile steeply pitched roofs together with various facing and roofing materials. The A&B design guide was also referenced to ensure compatibility with the wider landscape setting. The sinuous road alignment using the built form to define the street and frame the landscape edges follows the examples presented within the guide. Landscaping within the site uses indigenous hedge and tree planting to soften areas, preventing continuous views of the full site, reflecting the approach to views presented in the design guide. Materials have been carefully selected to directly relate to those within the heart of the village. An independent peer review was prepared by Neil Holland, an expert in traditionally designed residential architecture. The comments raised in that review process were addressed in the final design to ensure that the development will present itself as a high quality addition within the Burwash development boundary. The significant efforts put into the layout, scale, appearance and landscaping of the proposed development will ensure that it is wholly compatible with the site's position relative to the wider village and A or B setting. The proposed design now successfully addresses the issues raised previously and will deliver an exceptional place in which to live.
Thank you very much, Sam. Thank you for reading those out. A number of councillors members have put their names up to speak, but you can't really ask questions of Sam, and so we still have to just go through the process. I'll ask everyone in the order they've put their names up, but before that we have the member Ellen Kirby Green to speak, and I think then John Barnes is up after that. So Ellen, could I ask you to speak, please?
Yeah, thank you. If I may, I'd like to start by running through the history which gives context to today's application. In 2006, the local plan identified the site of 17 houses, 40% of which were to be affordable. Conditions included the provision of a footpath which would link the development to the village through Swan Meadow playing fields. In 2011, an application for outline planning permission was submitted, the basis of the application being, and I quote, the acute need for affordable homes. In 2017, the applicant decided that he was unable to deliver affordable homes if only building for 17 units, so submitted a new application to increase the number of units to 32, with 40% being affordable. He was given permission up to 30, and in 2018, a Section 106 agreement was signed with multiple obligations, two of which being the provision of the full proportion of affordable homes and providing the footpath link to the village facilities. In 2018, the developer, having known the site for some time, claimed that he had just realised that he couldn't actually deliver any affordable homes. The district valuer, whilst agreeing with the developer about the viability, said in his report that the reasons relied upon would have been known to the developer when the commitment was made. The very reasons for the issues around viability were the very reasons the parish council had opposed this application in 2017, namely the slope, the drainage and the general terrain of the site. It is quite remarkable that an experienced developer, having signed the 106 obligation in March 2018, discovered only a few months later that the site was not viable. At this time, the case officer said, this application is a full application. The proposals have not been submitted as a reserved matters application, as unlike the previous outline, it is now not proposed for viability reasons to afford affordable housing. This last application was turned down unanimously by the planning committee, a decision which was upheld on appeal. So that brings us to today. But this time we don't have a full planning application. This is not acceptable. The developer confirmed last month that there is no change to the viability report. He has confirmed to the parish council that no affordable homes will be included in the scheme. And indeed, the submitted plans by the developer include no affordable housing. Why, therefore, is there no full application? I'll tell you why. Because a cunning wheeze has been devised whereby the developer can get this through in stages. By sweeping the affordability issue under the carpet at this point, the developer will be able to jettison both the footpath and the affordable housing at any point moving forward. In fact, the planning officers know full well that there will be no affordable housing, as they are aware of the presence of the viability report and the fact that the viability has not changed. Yet they have chosen to include numbers of affordable units in the report to committee. Both the developer and the planning officers are fully aware that this site received outline approval in 2017, despite the harm to the AONB, because the balance was tilted in favour of development due to the footpath link to the village amenities and the delivery of much needed affordable homes. Had the application not included these matters, it would not have received approval. In fact, the case officer at the time stated in her report that this was contrary to RDC policy VL1, but further advised that there were the benefits of the affordable homes and footpath link. She added, and I quote, these benefits were and are still necessary to accompany any development and reflect local needs. So we now have what, in my view, is an underhand application being facilitated by officers who are determined to get houses on this site as evidenced at previous planning meetings. Moving on to the footpath, in 2017, the planning officer wrote, "The policy was subject to the local plan inspector's comments and local opinion, all of which agreed that the footpath link was essential to better integrate the proposed residential development of Strand Meadow with the village. The footpath would provide improved integration of Strand Meadow with the village centre, a shorter route which would reduce car use to the village shops and services." The planning officer has now adopted as fact the developer's protestations during the last planning application that the path is to only go as far as the boundary. This is because the developer and officers now accept that the Playing Field Association will not allow a public right-of-way through the recreation ground. This has been their consistent formal response, despite earlier claims to the contrary by both officers and the developer. The original decision was for a footpath to link the development to the village amenities. There is no point in building a footpath to a dead end where you would need a chainsaw to get through to the village. By not having this footpath linked to the village, the development is just not sustainable. Residents will need to walk down the hill, through Strand Meadow and back up Shrub Lane. I think we can all see that this means people will use their cars. Turning to the design, as you will note, the High Road AONB unit opposes this application. These objections are dismissed out of hand by the planning officer. I would like to make 2 points to the committee. Firstly, yes, the design has been peer reviewed, presumably because the appeal inspector commented in 2018 that the plans then hadn't been. Clearly, the applicant is going to provide a peer review which supports the development. Secondly, and I'm afraid to say, in my mind, there is a question over how officers can pass judgments about the impact on the AONB. In 2017, the designs before us were truly appalling. And a councillor who doesn't represent the ward was sitting next to me and said, "Gosh, they would look awful in Croydon." These entirely inappropriate designs were the subject of pre-application advice and supported by officers who in the report to the committee said, "As such, it is concluded that the proposal will conserve and enhance the overall character and appearance of the site within the AONB." Fortunately, both the planning committee and the appeal inspector took a totally different view. There is a reference to the proposed dwellings being the subject of public consultation locally and discussion with the parish council. As I'm under time constraints, I will only say that there has been no meaningful consultation. Much is made in the report about the reduced height of the houses. However, the difference in height is about 1 metre for the second half of the development. In fact, the architect has chosen to estimate the height of 4 plots. The chimney pots are not included, and if the group of houses at right angles to the slope were included, the house further up the slope would have a greater height than in the previous plans. When planning permission was granted for up to 30 houses, it was dependent on no adverse harm to the AONB. It is apparent that given the site restrictions, there is no way of fitting in 30 houses without adverse harm to the AONB. The architectural design is not the issue. As the appeal inspector stated in 2019, there is a marked difference between a scheme of 17 houses and one proposing 30. The latter would have a greater level of built form with different impacts. To conclude, this site, which is known locally as Watercress Fields, despite the developer trying to claim otherwise, is not and never has been a suitable location for 30 houses. That number of houses, no matter what the design, will have a detrimental impact on the AONB. The original permission was granted on the premise that there would be affordable housing and a footpath link, both of which are now not happening. That tilted the balance in favour of development. It is overwhelmingly opposed by the residents of Burwash. This site does not feature in the neighbourhood plan, which is now at the examination stage, about which there is little mention in the officer's report. There will be pressure put on you to grant this application today. I would urge members to have the courage to stand up to officers, apply the planning rules as they have done with previous applications, and refuse this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kirby-Green. We're going to move into the discussion, debate, and any questions for officers. I think I do have to really make it clear that talking about this application is not about the affordable housing. I know it's extraordinarily frustrating neither is it about highways or parking outside the proposed development. Whether we like highways responses or not, they are a statutory authority, and an argument against that it's generally not going to go anywhere unless there is substantive evidence by a professional body to say so. So it is very frustrating, but we need to keep our minds focused on the application, despite all the frustrating things that have been raised today. And I assure you that I understand that they are frustrating. So I'm hoping.
Point of order, Chairman.
If you like, John.
I have a dual role, I'm afraid, today. I am both a local member and a member of the Planning Committee.
And I'm going to ask you to speak first.
Yep.
Yeah. So
that's fine.
Because you're a member of the Planning Committee as well, I will always let the non-member speak first and then yourself. So I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to ask Councillor Tempe if she can remember her question at this point to kick off. So, Councillor Barnes.
Come back as a member of the Planning Committee, probably to discuss a number of considerations.
I think as you have the dual role, you have to make a choice. I'm quite happy for you to speak first because you are a member for that ward, but that doesn't mean you can wear both hats. Otherwise, you'll have to declare an interest and as one of supporting the parish, if you like. So you need to be behaving as a member of the Planning Committee. But I'm very happy for you to speak first because you're also the ward member.
I'm well aware of that, Chairman, and I'm going to make my remarks in two quite distinct parts. In the first part, rather like your officer reading out comments, I want to make just a couple of points on behalf of residents. These are not necessary points that I would make in my own submission.
Understood.
The first is to underline, in defence of my residents who have been accused of being NIMBY about this site, that this is not the case. The parish council itself promoted an exception site, and that exception site has now been built. It doesn't count towards the village total, but it does show that the parish council has been proactive in trying to meet the housing needs of residents. The other thing, which has already been referred to, so I simply will underline it again, is that both Save Our Fields, who speak for the bulk of residents in Burwash, and the parish council have been extremely supportive of three other developments, one at Oakley's, one at Ashwood, and another one, which are all in the process of coming forward. In other words, locals are not against having housing in the right place. What they feel is that this housing would not actually have ever got onto the local plan if it had not been actually accompanied by affordable housing. When you're tilting a balance, the AONB weighs very heavily on one side of the balance. It takes something quite extraordinary to bring the balance back level. And the extraordinary thing, which clearly weighed back in 2006 in favour of the principle of residential development, and which I know weighed with the committee in 2017, because I was present at that meeting, was they put against the AONB the affordable element. And it's really slightly artificial to discuss this today with no reference to affordables. Those are the points I would make on behalf of the village, not necessarily on the part of myself. Do you want me to speak now as a member of the Planning Committee, or would you rather take questions?
I think it would be appropriate to separate what you want to say, just so people are clear. So we'll come back to you in a minute. I'm going to ask Councillor Tempe as again, hopefully she can remember what she was going to ask. So, Councillor Turnbull.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. Along the lines that this is just the reserved matters as outlined, I have a landscape buffer question for Sarah.
Please.
When we were on site, the question came up whether that particular buffer was going to be accessible by the general public, or whether it was purely going to be part of this particular housing development with no general access.
Sarah.
Yeah, I think the intention is that it's not a general public accessible space. The public amenity area is at the southern end of the site,
right.
Where it butts up to the recreation ground, the area where there was some question about having allotments, but that's the public open space area. The landscape buffer area and ecological area is not intended for general access.
Right. So Sarah, is there, I mean, we're just seeing a red line. So is there going to be some sort of fencing or some sort of shrubs or?
Yes, if I can I'll just share my screen with you again to show you
the red line.
The plans, yeah. Slideshow. Sorry, I'm just trying to find the correct landscaping plan for you. That's probably one of the better ones. You can see that obviously the black fencing that Councillor Beinhall referenced in the videos is actually set slightly outside the garden boundaries here, but these are all going to be fenced and hedged around the gardens. Obviously, we have got this quite thick hedge line that runs through that with the stream and things in it, which will go down to the pond. And as you move into the second field as well, again, you've got the hedge and the fence here. I mean, there is going to be some accessibility at this end where the footpath would go in round the public open space area. But I mean, it's not intended, particularly in the northern field, which is more contained, that will be open to general use.
OK, but I'm still unclear as to how people would be stopped coming onto it, I suppose.
Well, there are further details to come in as part of the landscape management plan. So that and there's another condition about boundary treatments on the outline permission, which has yet to be applied for. So that particular, as you say, security issue would be covered at that point.
OK, thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Sarah, why do you have that slide up? Oh, sorry, you've taken it down.
I can put it up again.
Yeah, well, yeah, sorry, I didn't want to interject with my own question, but as it was up there. Can you tell us the green back gardens, how much of those are flat and how much is just sloping at the current angle?
Right. Where the grey areas immediately to the rear of the dwellings are patios. Yeah. And so that's a flat area. Then you've got some steps that go up into another sort of terrace, and then you've got the slope behind that.
Okay, so that green area above the terraces are.
Just go to there. Yeah, if I show you the sections there, you can see that you've got the patio area at the back, steps up to a terrace, and then you've still got a little bit of garden that would be above that, before you've got the fences to the rest of the landscaped area.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Councillor Harmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I understand there are lots of things that I find, like everyone else, really frustrating that we're not allowed to talk about. So I'll focus on a bit of it that concerns me. And I understand that the applicant isn't here to answer any questions. Regarding Sam's report he read out from the applicant, it was stated parking and turning was acceptable. As I read through the report, however, it's extremely disturbing. For example, however, a refuse vehicle would be required to reverse a significant distance when serving plots 26 and 30. This is not ideal. Another part, parking spaces for 30 would be required to reverse a considerable distance before being able to turn. Spaces far from ideal. On the next page, as the initial layout is to remain unadopted, I'll leave the drainage. Someone else, I'm sure, can ask that question because there are many. Another one, it is noted that the 3-bed dwellings are only provided with single open parking space within the curtilage of the property. This is less than ideal. And the provisions for 2 allocated parking spaces within the curtilage of each would be preferred. So this is real life. This is how it would happen if this went ahead, and all the inconveniences that go with it. Yeah, I find it extremely disturbing that it's far from ideal. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. Councillor Ganley.
Thank you, Chairman. I find it quite unacceptable that we are unable to ask questions of those that Sam spoke for. The applicant, the agent and the architect are unwilling to give up 5 minutes of their day to speak to this committee. That speaks volumes to me. But I do have a question. Sarah, in your initial presentation, you made great play of the number of consultees who are in support of this application. You listed them one by one, and yet you made no mention whatsoever of those who are opposed to the application. The chairman spoke earlier of the need for fairness and balance. Clearly, your presentation was neither fair nor balanced. Would you agree?
Oh, dear me. Sarah, would you like to respond? That's a bit of a tough question.
Sorry, Chairman, just before Sarah starts.
Would you like to respond?
Well, I just have to interject. I'm not quite sure that's a fair line of questioning, is it?
Well, would you like to respond, Sam, as head of development?
Well, yeah, I mean, in the first instance, I would say that officers produce reports to you that are bring all material considerations to your attention and are fairly balanced. We do make a summary before we at the planning committee itself, and we pick out particular issues. You know, take and point. An open forum like this, officers are.
Okay, well,
Chairman, I'm sorry, I do suggest, in fact, was not first.
I think Councillor Ganley, that's Councillor Ganley's view of the report, and not necessarily an accusation against the report by the officer. That's purely the view of the member. So he is entitled to have that view express it out how he chooses. Councillor Prochak.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to say at the beginning, I do agree that it's not adequate to have something read out. I'm sure I would have liked to ask a question, and I'm sure others would have liked to have asked questions. So I'm glad we're going to discuss that later as a policy and what we should do if that happens in the future. That was my first point. The other thing is, obviously, we need officers' responses to some of the quite severe questions, like do we have a duty if we feel we are being manipulated in terms of the affordable deadline and the footpath being excluded. Is manipulation something that we have to agree on and then refuse on that basis? I don't know. It's not possible. We tried to ask the applicant to extend this application because of COVID and site visits and so forth. And of course, he wasn't willing to do that because there's a deadline in March where the last application falls off. So we understand why he's brought it. I still don't understand why we can't have the 106 to look at. We've had great discussions in the past about 106,
and how we can get some control over those, knowing that it's affordable housing that's at the top of our list. So I think those questions, if the officers can give us a steer on those, that would be useful.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Projek. Who would like to answer that? Sam or Sarah?
Can I come back then? Chairman, can I come back?
Please do. No, please do. It's a key question because it has been raised, as you heard, by the speakers, by the members who are all experiencing extraordinary frustration over this, and it's suggested that if there's a belief that in fact the developer is not going to deliver affordable housing, as has been demonstrated in an earlier application through viability, and it's very difficult to see how this differs materially. Then, if the committee feels they're being misled, but what is the appropriate action?
Frankly, Chairman, I don't understand it. The decision has to be made on the evidence before you. It's an outline planning application that's already been approved in the past, and this is the reserve matters details that follows that. There's no getting around the fact that we dealt with a full planning application previously where viability was raised as an issue. But in this is an application relating to an already approved consent that has a planning obligation signed to deliver affordable housing. Sarah has explained previously that the details in relation to that affordable housing are to be discharged as part of the 106 obligation prior to the commencement of development if this proposal were to be approved today. But there's also no getting around the fact that an applicant could still make a request to vary the planning obligation at some point in the future. Again, should these details be approved here today, but that's not evidence of manipulation or something I consider that the planning committee could turn the proposals down on. These are details that, for all intents and purposes, we're under the impression include affordable housing at this point in time. But like you're all well versed in, things are subject to change, but there's a due process to go through in that regard. And you'll just have to set aside whatever it is being commented on by the developer, the parish council, ward councillors in respect to some of the comments made today, and just focus on those facts.
Thank you, Sam. It is true. I mean, this is the application we have to consider. If for some reason somebody put up a proposal to refuse based on affordable housing, you could be fairly sure you would fail at an appeal or a highways ground, because they are not, the examiner or an inspector would not consider them because they're not part of it. So, Councillor Project, I said you could come back again.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chair. Just to remind members that the 2017 application was recommended for approval by the officers, and it was us as members that actually refused it. And the inspector on appeal supported our reasons for refusal. So just to remind you that we were proved right by the inspector on that decision. And all the way through, I just want to mention one thing, which we recently had the biodiversity training net gain. So I was very pleased to see there are conditions on biodiversity. I remember 50 trees are going to be cleared and killed. And so I was glad, thank officers for that. But if we actually do approve today, I would like to see that with the condition strengthened, that we have the county ecologist sign off on those mitigation measures. Because remember, it's net gain that we're looking for, because we have a biodiversity crisis in as much as we also have a climate crisis. The two words that stand out for me is conserve and enhance. And conserve and enhance, we have to ask ourselves, does this development sit comfortably in the landscape? Does it meet the aims of the High Weald AO and B management plan, which we've signed up to? Does this development enhance the architectural quality of the High Weald in scale, layout and design? So in the appeal, the inspector used those words a lot, conserve and enhance. So we have to decide if it's unsympathetic in terms of scale and appearance. And so I think those are the things that we need to consider. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to ask John Barnes to seg in at this point because he put his name down earlier and I did separate his speaking in two parts. Councillor Barnes.
Yes, I think Sue has moved us into debate. I was going to ask a question, but I'll make it as a point. Some of us will remember at Netherfield an interesting parallel. When we actually look at an outline application, all we have is an indicative drawing. So although we approve the principle of residential development, we don't actually approve the numbers. Here, what we did was to say we would certainly not consider more than 30, but that does not mean we're committed to 30. It's up to 30. And at Netherfield, as you remember, we turned it down when we saw the detailed drawings, and subsequently the developer came back with fewer houses because he recognised our reason for turning it down was a good one. The parallel is almost exact here because when we look at the detailed drawings, and I would remind you this is broadly the same scheme that we turned down in 2018, the one that went to the inspector, fundamentally, what we ended up with, and I'm going to quote from the high-wheeled objection, but I can quote over and again from the inspector, the proposed layout demonstrates that this site cannot accommodate 30 dwellings without causing unacceptable harm to the character of the A&B as set out below. I agree with that. It's not the principle of development that was accepted in 2006. Had this been a small development at the top end of Strand Meadow, rather than on the land to the southwest of it, I would have looked on this with more favour. But here it seems to me you have an overdense development. It's higher in places than, frankly, the previous proposal. The design has improved, but it's improved by reference to the high street. I'm somewhat puzzled by that. We are actually on the outside edge of a village. Instead of going to look at School Lane, for example, or Spring Lane, or any of the lanes that are on the edge of the village, the architect was commissioned to study the high street, the heart, the centre of the village, not the edge of the village. So I really am rather curious to find we're now being told that on the edge of the village, we should replicate the high street. No, I don't actually think that makes for common sense. I'm even more worried than some about the parking. There are obvious deficiencies about the parking in the separation between a number of the parking sites and the houses. I mean, people with young children trying to get from the car with their goods to the house will have quite a long way to walk. Do they carry the child first or do they carry the goods? Some houses have to back quite a long way before they can turn. So there are all kinds of actual practical problems with parking. But what I'm really concerned at is the A&B, because the first thing you look at from the footpath or on longer distances will be a hard edge, which is a row of cars. You are actually going to put grasscrete in along the edge of the stream, thus raising the bank visibility quite sizably, squaring it off, making it totally artificial. So instead of a gill valley, you will now have a row of cars, their windscreens glinting in the sun and actually affecting distances. We're told somehow the landscaping is going to prevent this. I had a look at what the landscape architect for the developer said. He speaks of the long views from the upper part of the site, long views into the high weald, which he regards as an advantage. But I would remind you, if you can see out into the high weald, then the high weald can see into the site. It seems to me what we are creating here is essentially the wrong type of development. I don't blame the architect. I don't think he can avoid doing serious harm to the AONB by this development. Sarah quoted one paragraph from the inspector's report, paragraph 11, which I remind you ends by saying that nothing actually in what he said about possible advantages from the linear development reduces the prominence of the buildings to an extent, but not to a point where it would offset the limitations I've identified. What he goes on to say in 13 is the positive aspects of the layout would not outweigh the significant harm that would occur from the unsympathetic scale and appearance of the proposed buildings. Again, in paragraph 15, it's like a leitmotif running through the inspector's report. Nevertheless, my overall conclusion is that the appeal scheme would significantly harm the character and appearance of the area and the landscape of the AONB, which it would fail to conserve or enhance. And his final conclusion, again, repeats all those points. He makes the point that what we have here is something deeply damaging to a historic landscape, which we have a duty to preserve. Burwash is a 14th century village set in a late medieval landscape. Our duty is not merely to conserve that, but to enhance it. This development actually would destroy a valuable part of that landscape. It's on part of 3 medieval fields. We are subscribers to the High Weald Management Plan. The High Weald unit, therefore, has a very considerable part to play in all our discussions. And they have said very firmly that this is a wholly unacceptable built form for the edge of a village, and it would destroy an important part of the AONB. I have to say those views carry great weight with me. Whatever the objections to locals, it is actually the AONB, for my mind, that trumps everything.
Thank you very much, Councillor Barnes. Councillor Mear.
Thank you, Chairman. I think it's 4 questions for Sarah Shepherd, please.
Thank you.
And the first one, partly covered by Councillor John Barnes. By either side of the stream, the ground will have to be raised considerably to provide the roadway and parking. Now, I'm assuming that this must involve a retaining wall, probably gabion blocks or something of that sort. Do we know what is being used to raise to make the retaining wall? And do we know by how many meters the ground will be raised at that point?
Sarah. Are you with us, Sarah?
Yes. Sorry, I have my mouse cursor on the other screen.
That's okay.
Yes, they are. There are details in with the arboricultural report that says that they would be using gabion walls, and that has been considered by the county ecologist, and she's indicated to me that that would be acceptable. And that parking area, as you say, it wouldn't. You're not talking about meters. You might be talking about a meter around that sort of height, but it's not meters and meters to get the parking area. You are talking about the lower level of the site, as you saw in the videos. And going back to Mr. Barnes's reference about views out from the higher levels, yes, there are views out from the higher levels above the houses, but the location for the houses is in the lower part of the site.
Sorry, can I stick to these gabion blocks. How high will the gabion blocks be from the base to the top? Because when we went on the site, it seemed as if it would be at least 2 meters and probably more.
I don't actually have those details in front of me. They're part of the details that we haven't got specifically at this stage.
Did the cross section show it, Sarah? The cross section of the housing, or they don't run down that far?
They do, but I can't, because obviously I'm looking at this on screen. I haven't got the facility here to be able to measure for you.
Oh, that's all right. I mean, if you looked outside where you come in, where the existing car parking is, and there's a sort of a track that goes down to the field, that level there is sort of similar to the levels inside, aren't they? What would that give us any indication of the height, the raising of the height?
Or as I say, you're looking at sort of anything from sort of a meter, some of it's less, some of it's more than a metre, but I mean, you're looking at around a metre sort of height, yes.
Where you come into the entrance on the right hand side there, to bring that level from the sort of stream or above the stream looked at that point to be, possibly 3 meters, and then going down to maybe where the pond is to a metre or so.
Yeah, I'm afraid, as I say, I don't have those specific details in front of me.
Okay.
Thank you. Second question concerns the disabled access or the use of steps outside and changed levels inside. And you referred to the inspector's decision saying that it was acceptable, that was acceptable. But the inspector made it very clear that his decision predated the DASA, which was only in draft form at that stage. And of course, the DASA has introduced a significant change in that we've adopted the, and this is where you will have to help me and explain, and that's why I'm asking the question, because I really don't know the answer. We have adopted the building regulations on disabled access and so on. So the situation has changed quite considerably since the inspector made those comments. What is the present position, please?
Well, obviously, you can only apply the relevant part of the building regs that's applicable to the site. If we said that we couldn't build on any sloping land, then we'd be in a big even more of a problem in terms of providing our housing in our area, as most of our areas and villages and things are built on ridges and valleys, and development is on hillsides.
But what are our policy commitments to providing access or eliminating difficulties for an ageing population? What is the policy that we have to apply, please?
Well, the policy said that it needs to comply with the building regulations. As you say, we would look to provide a higher degree than building regulation 4.1. We'd look to try and apply 4.2 if we can, which is, as you are referring to, not having any steps at the front. But if you have a sloping site, then it's not always possible to do that. And providing they can meet building regulations 4.1, then that is what we would have to accept.
But do they? And I think there's an obligation, is there not, with the affordable element, that a certain amount of it has to be disabled friendly.
So again,
just to interject, I think that the simple response, Councillor Meir, is that the policy position is that we have to try and achieve a certain standard, and that typically is M42 or M43, unless there's practical reasons or financial reasons not to do so. And I suppose what we've explained in this instance is there are not practical reasons to do so. So that's the policy position. Do it where we can, but if we can't, that is acceptable as long as the scheme is acceptable in other terms.
But it can presumably be thrown into the balance when we come to make our decision that we're not able to provide these particular facilities.
Indeed, but I suppose what I'd offer in that respect is that we'd have to demonstrate why you consider that an application potentially be refused for that particular reason, given what you know about the site and the comments that have been made previously.
Thank you. Shall I move to the next question?
Yes, please.
Yes, and this was one I raised about materials and chimneys. I don't know, Sarah, whether you had an opportunity to find out, but I think these are dummy chimneys, are they not? There are no chimney breasts beneath them to support them.
Yes. No, that has been confirmed that they would be, as you say, mock chimneys. They'd be finished in brick slips to match the bricks used on the dwelling, which are quite often used on developments nowadays.
Very, very clever. Yes, and what I was going to suggest here is that if permission were to be granted today, I would consider that there should be a condition, say, along the lines of, notwithstanding anything in the general development order, there should be no change to fenestration, chimneys, or external materials without coming back for planning permission. I really think that is necessary in view of the very high requirement for architectural appearance and views from the AONB and into this is part of the AONB. Clearly, it's a very big issue on the quality of materials and built form, and I do feel that there will be a great justification for having that condition.
Are we able to achieve that in conditions, Sarah?
Yes, that is something that you could look at removing or restricting permitted development rights to undertake alterations to the external elevations without applying for permission. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
And the last point, which I think has largely been covered, the green area behind the houses, it's only a small part of that which is only going to be offered up for community use, I understand. Is that right?
Yes, the main area for public use is the smaller field at the southwest end of the site, which is the area below the current recreation ground that is accessed off Ham Lane.
So we just don't know what will happen to the rest of it?
Well, as I say, the rest of it is down in conditions and in the Section 106 area for landscaping and ecology. And there are specific requirements for a management plan for that area.
Thank you very much. Those are all my questions.
Sarah, just on that point to finish off, who would actually own that land then?
That land would go to a management company. So you'd need a management company not only to manage that area of the landscaping buffer area, but to obviously manage the amenity space, as the parish council said they no longer have an interest in it. They would also need to manage the parking area and the surface water drainage area as well, and ecological mitigation measures as well. That would all be part of that management company.
All right, thank you. Are you satisfied with your questions, Councillor Muir?
Thank you. Yes, Chairman.
Councillor Norton.
Thank you, Jonathan. I don't know Burwash very well, but when I came over for the site meeting on Tuesday, I was bowled over by the beauty of the village. It must be one of the prettiest villages in Sussex, perhaps in the whole of the UK. But of course, attractive villages don't live in a void. The village needs its setting in the AONB. Can I quote a sentence from the appeal judge's report, which I don't think anybody has used this afternoon, but I think is valid. He says, the appeal site has a visual connection to the wider rural landscape, particularly in views from Ham Lane and the public footpath that crosses the field to the northwest. Now, the morning that we were going around the site Tuesday the weather was very inclement, the site was very waterlogged, but there were no less than 4 groups of people using that footpath and walking along Ham Lane. So it is used. Now, we were given a lot of bland reassurances by the architect about the changed development was going to have a soft face to the outside world, but the reality is it's not going to be hidden. It's going to be visible. And can I finally agree very strongly with Councillor Barnes? That statement from the inspector, the scheme would significantly harm the character and appearance of the area and the landscape of the AONB. That is conclusive for me. That alone will make me oppose this application. Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you very much. Councillor Coleman, so it's been a little while getting to you.
Yeah, so just under an hour, Chair, I believe. So well done, everybody, for persevering.
Can you remember the question? Or?
Yes, yeah, I've got several comments to make, and then I've also got a question for the officers. Firstly, if it's okay, Chair, I would just like to voice my opinion that I do think Councillor Ganley's comments were not fair. I think we can disagree with the balance an officer has come to, but to suggest that an officer has not provided balance or not been fair in their reports is out of order. I think we need to show a bit more respect to our officers in that regard. Moving to my sort of substantive points, I guess. Firstly, I think as others have said, it's a shame we didn't have a speaker on behalf of the applicant. I do have concerns with written submissions being read out. Firstly, we all trust Sam's voice as a voice of authority and a voice of knowledge. And when we're used to hearing Sam Batchelor speak in his officer capacity, it can be hard for us, I think, to picture him speaking as somebody else and with presumably less validity than that of a neutral officer. I also question, I don't know whether those written statements were submitted after the deadline for written representations, but if they were, that would surely present a sort of a loophole for applicants, supporters, objectors, etc., to send in written submissions after the deadline if they were in place of their speaking at committee. But to the applicant application itself, I do think we do need to remember that we have to assess this on planning merit alone. And the report does say that approval is recommended. Much of the comments people have made have been within the reserved matters, and so not for our consideration. And I don't think we can consider the hypotheticals that have been mentioned around if the previous application were to be X, it would have been rejected, things like that. I don't think we can say that is a valid sort of reason to object to this application. My question to Sarah, because I think, or to any of the officers, because I think we've had a lot of comparing this to the previous application, a lot of citing of the appeal, and using that as a reason why this isn't valid. Could Sarah or other officers clarify what the differences are between this and the application, or some of the main differences between this and the application that went to appeal?
Yes. Would you actually like to see a plan of the previous application?
That'd be helpful.
I have got one here. I'll just do a screen share so that this is just this is a street scene from the application that was refused. Don't know if you can all see that now. It was previously the scheme was based on taking the 3-storey dwellings in Strand Meadow as their point to start the design from, and that's what they submitted. So as you can see, it was looking at that more sort of late 20th century element of Burwash. There was a lot of discussion by committee, comments from the parish and objectors that they weren't considering the historic cues that are represented in the High Street, and that's why the architects looked at the High Street architecture in looking at the scheme now, because of those comments that were made previously. So yeah, it was quite a different scheme in terms of its appearance, in terms of its design. As you can see, there were excessive heights of underbuild underneath all the several of the dwellings there. So it was quite different.
Yep. Sam, are you happy with that? Did you have another question on that, Sam? Did you?
Sorry, my unmute button got stuck there for a moment. Yeah, I think for me that clarifies that we can't take the appeal decision from the previous application as reason to not resolve to approve this application. But thanks very much.
Okay, Councillor Errington.
Hi, thank you. I'll try and be as brief as I can. My first question is to Sarah regarding the parking. 6.1.3. Can you just clarify, are there going to be 14 parking spaces for visitors or 16 as recommended by East Sussex? And is there going to be a disabled space? It mentions the size that the disabled space should be, but not whether, I couldn't quite understand whether there was one within that 14.
Sorry, I have my thing on mute. Sorry, I beg your pardon. Yeah, the parking is a mixture of on-plot parking and then some parking down the opposite side. So the visitor parking is scattered among the parking on that lower level on the opposite side, and that would include, I mean, yes, he's mentioned a disabled bay, and that could be included as the end bay, but as you already commented, given the slopes on the site, I'm not so sure that you would actually need a disabled bay in this development.
But not even for, it's like saying, oh, Mum, I've got a new house, but you can't come and see me because, anyway.
Well, the facilities are there to provide it.
Right, and are there 14 rather than the 16? That's recommended. Sorry, it says it's their calculator says 16, but it says there's going to be 14.
Yes, what the as you say, the county highways have mentioned 50. Well, there's 50 allocated and 16 unallocated visitor spaces. So,
but that's their calculation. If you go a bit further down, it said there would also be 14 spaces reserved for use by visitors.
Yes, 14 of those 16 would be for visitors.
Right, so overall there's going to be 66 on the site. That's great, thank you. The other question I would probably have put to the applicant if they were here was about the maintenance. Now, you've already said that it would cover certain things. Presumably it would also cover things like the maintenance of the railings, because of the steps there are a lot of railings, and you said there were going to be some raised wooden beds. Would they all come under the maintenance fee that the residents would have to pay?
Yes, the management company for landscape maintenance, they would cover all public areas. So as you say, the public areas of parking, the public areas of access with the railings and the planters and things in those front areas would be part of that maintenance and management, yes.
So as with flats, for example, they'd have to pay, I don't know, £50, £100 a month towards that.
Yes,
maintenance.
that's normally how they set up management companies. I mean, those details are would be required to be finalised as part of the Section 106 agreement, but that is what we would normally be looking for.
Right, okay, and my final question was just a discussion really with the applicant regarding especially the sort of the family friendliness or lack of it in terms of the gardens and the size of the bedrooms compared with something which is being developed locally in my ward, but again, they're not here to discuss it, so I can't. So thank you for your answers.
Thank you very much. Councillor Curtis.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to say thank you for the video and the pictures earlier on, which fully demonstrated the topography and how challenging it is. It reminded me of Where Eagles Dare, with the sheerness of the site, having commented previously about the need for a cable car to access the site, so it was quite apt really. But thank you for that. Just a few points, and the original planning was granted assuming affordable housing and footpath. We know that, we've heard about that. I'm disappointed that public consultation of any particular force has still not been available to date. I think the residents were palmed off with, some junior members previously, but considering the size of the application, I think it could have been dealt with, and we questioned this last time. Although a new application, bearing in mind the previous one was dismissed by the inspector, No palpable improvements over the previous application have so far been indicated. Design still more suited to urban street scene, not an ancient village. Gardens would be at greater risk, from what I can see, of a significant landslip, because there's one hell of a hill in front of them. I'm not quite sure the insistence on building in a totally unacceptable site, which has been demonstrated on previous speakers. If viability is in question, why build in the first place? Biodiversity issues have to take priority, I would think, given the huge amount of earthworks that would be required and anticipated. And I have to say that the application contradicts all the policies of the Countryside and Rights of Way Act 2000, the NPPF paragraph 172, section 3 of the High Weald Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty Management Plan, just to mention a few. There's many concerns over this that are still valid and have not been alleviated in any way to date. Various refusals and appeals dismissed would indicate this site not suitable for planning, full stop. Access is very limited. We've all been to see the site. Whichever way you try to embellish it, it's challenging. When you start talking about dust carts and emergency vehicles, I find it unacceptable that we should even be considering that. Repeated amendments to the application could be expected regarding affordable housing and footpath, and we'll be deluding ourselves if we think otherwise. AONB and its effects, it would be detrimental to the character and appearance of the area. Conservation of wildlife and cultural heritage are major considerations. Rother District Council have a responsibility not to allow this development to continue under any guise. In conclusion, Chairman, whatever way this application is viewed, significant and long-lasting damage would be attributed to the AONB. Cultural heritage would be cast aside for a short-sighted need for development that is neither practical, does not satisfy the requirements needed, fails to address the very matter of conservation, and throws biodiversity to the wind, which, as you all know, is now so very important given our current climate emergency. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, and also for your praise of the video. It wasn't an Attenborough moment, but it will be interesting for those who visited the site to reflect later on whether it was representative or not, because I think that's a learning process. But thank you for those comments.
I think a BAFTA would be coming, Chairman.
I'll expect it. Councillor Mary Barnes.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I think nearly every point that I would have made at this stage has already been made, and extremely well. And I must say that I think that the one thing we're taking away from today is the very, very high level of concern that there is about this development taking place. Thank you very much for putting me right on the whole idea of who should speak and making certain that we get all the right information and are able to ask the right questions at the beginning of those who are actively involved in the application. And I do think it's absolutely essential that we have that facility in future. So no, I'm very, very happy. I would have totally actually plugged the whole idea of the AONB, but that statement from the inspector has been made, I think, probably 3 times during the course of this meeting, and I would totally stand by it. I think it's a very, very important thing that we do not allow this development to happen. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Councillor Barnes. There was just a prompt given to me, which I think is worth emphasising, that the visits to the site, and I will say they were visits to the site, they were not officer conducted because it was not able to be done under the COVID situation, was done in small groups with social distancing, masks worn by everyone, so that those could visit the site without causing any issue. But the committee in the process of their work are allowed to do that. So I think it's just worth clarifying that for anyone watching and perhaps raising a concern. Now I do have to apologise to Councillor Langlands, who did put her name up to speak, and I know it will be frustrating for her that she is not on the committee today. And I do run a policy of only committee and ward members speaking unless there is some exceptional reason or circumstance involved. And so I do apologise, Councillor Langlands, that there is a lot of discussion today, and I would normally expect somebody to ask me before the meeting and explain why they would have something very specific to say. So I'm going to move on to Councillor Madeley.
Thank you, Chair. In fact, my question has been put by Councillor Mear, and it was regarding disability access. So I can have nothing further to say on that. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Now, I'm just going to make a question or a comment to Sarah, just something picked up during that. There was a question as to the building up of the area for parking, and we don't know the levels, which is a little unfortunate. It was pretty clear that at one end it's going to be at least 3 metres and it would vary along the way, but it's very hard to know. But even at that level, there is going to be an enormous amount of soil removed because all these houses have to be dug into a large bank, and that's going to generate a lot more soil than even the soil required to build up to 3 metres at the bottom. Yet the applicant says that there's not going to be very much taken away. These seem to be inconsistent statements. How are we to deal with that?
The applicant's intention is that they do, as you said, cut and fill, and they're not envisaging huge amounts of excess soil, and they would propose that in general that would be used elsewhere on the, within the site, and hence there is a conditions within the ecological conditions regarding site levels and soils.
So the only places they could use them in the site is where they're going to fill up to make the parking area, which you think is only about 1 metre. I mean, I think it's up to 3 metres, but even that area wouldn't take that volume of soil. I mean, I don't think you have to be a civil engineer to see that.
Yes, but when you look at the actual sections, there's cut at the back of the houses and some fill at the front of the houses.
Okay.
So it's, it's within the actual housing development. And as you say, parking would take some of it, but there's cut and fill to actually build the houses themselves.
Right. Okay. No, thank you. Now, Councillor Barnes has said that he wants to move. Just before he does, is there anyone else who wants to speak? I mean, I think there's been a lot of discussion here. I'm not sure there are any more issues to raise or to discuss. I just to sort of do a little summary, there is enormous frustration over the issue of the affordable housing, which is not directly related to this application, as frustrating as that might be, or the access, or the concept of up to 30 houses on site. All these issues have been raised. The question, one of the questions at hand is the design and layout and scale of this development improved enough to overcome the decision of the appeal inspector, because that's what he was looking at. He was looking at a layout which pretty much sat in the same spot, but of a different design. But his decision didn't actually relate to the design itself. He merely quoted, it really related to the impact on the OMB. Is the change in the landform and the mass of the development appropriate to overcome that decision that he put forward? What are the differences there? These are the things you must consider. What is the harm to the OMB balanced against the delivery of houses? And we can't make a judgment on anything more than with what is within the application. And of course, the principle of development and the fact that it is within a development boundary. Does as has been raised, the row of houses along that edge and the frontage of the houses create an urban edge to the village? And does the design actually follow something which would be appropriate in Burwash in that location? So these are the questions you really need to be considering. And I will pass over to Councillor Barnes, who wishes to move something, and ask him to tell us what he would like to move.
I want to move that we should not allow condition 1 to be discharged. I think that probably implies that we should not allow 2 or 3 to be discharged either. Just a couple of comments. Councillor Coleman was talking simply about design. It is in fact the linear nature, the massing, the layout, which hasn't altered a great deal. The design has, and I accept it's improved. I accept he's tried to capture the high street. My question there would be whether it was better to capture the AONB and the outskirts of villages rather than the high street. The recommendation was it was out of keeping last time with both Burwash High Street, but also with the AONB. Those two things possibly took the wrong cue. The reason why it's partly on the massing and above all the effect on the AONB, but I would just point out that in this day and age, we do need to be thinking not just about cars when we're thinking about access. We do need to think about pedestrian access and cycling access. And although the county have said they're satisfied about vehicles, indeed the applicant is saying that was dealt with at outline stage. What hasn't really been dealt with is pedestrian access to services, school, doctor's surgery, all of which lie to the south of the high street. So on access alone, I don't think condition 1 has been satisfied, nor do I think it's been predetermined, because we've dealt satisfactorily, or at least I don't think satisfactorily, but dealt with our satisfaction with vehicular access. Similarly on ecology, I'd like to strengthen with Councillor Prochak. It seems to me we have a duty under the 2006 legislation to actually enhance biodiversity. It's not merely to mitigate. And it seems to me what we've had from the county ecologist, from every other ecologist except their own who looked at the site, huge gaps in the ecological assessment. So I think we need to tighten that clause. But my motion for the moment, I'm coming to a conclusion, Jonathan. My motion at the moment is that we should refuse to allow condition 1 now to be said to be satisfactorily discharged.
And are you putting forward a proposal on 2, 3, and 7?
I think 2 and 3 follow. 7 is on drainage. I think it's dangerous to move because the drainage people themselves say we would have to put a different condition in. So I think it's for later discussion whether we should redraft that condition, but clearly 7 can't be withdrawn in its entirety. 1, 2, and 3 I don't think can be. Clearly there are some process conditions. The archaeology has been investigated. I have no objection to those being withdrawn, but so 1, 2, and 3, and 7, no.
So you're proposing it for the reasons of. Can you just articulate clearly? Are you saying that you mentioned the OMB, you mentioned the inspector's report? Are you wishing this to be refused on the basis that it does not meet, that it does not sufficiently address the issues raised by the appeal inspector? Is that what you're saying?
What I'm saying is that I don't think anything actually outweighs the irreparable damage to the AONB, and certainly nothing has changed in terms of the layout and the massing. There have been changes to the design. I think the wrong design cue has been taken from the high street rather than from the AONB and edge of villages. I am saying that although vehicular access has been dealt with, I'm saying other forms of access which matter to the green agenda, particularly pedestrian access and cycling access, are not satisfactorily dealt with. I'm saying that I think the parking in particular is unsatisfactory. It provides a very hard edge indeed to the village, massed along the stream. So that will be another reason.
Okay.
I'm saying that I don't think the ecology has been satisfactorily tackled, and I think that needs a strengthened condition because there are huge gaps in the ecological assessment. I could go on, but I think that gives you a fair clue as to why I'm unhappy.
All right, that's the proposal you're putting forward. Could I ask either Sarah or Sam, it's a normal process that they would comment on those reasons prior to somebody seconding if they chose to and a vote being taken. So I'm not sure who would like to comment.
Well, I'll go in the first instance, and Sarah, if you want to add anything, if that's okay, Chairman, then that might be the best way to do it. I think we're going to have make another attempt at kind of articulating what it is that the recommendation is that's being put on the table. I've made a few notes here, and I don't think that I've misheard or misrepresented what Councillor Barnes has just mentioned. I do take on board that he's talking about the linear nature of the site, the massing and layout of the housing, and how he thinks that's not appropriate in this location. That he's acknowledging that design has changed, but not necessarily for the better, because it's picking up on the wrong cues, and that ultimately there's impact on the AONB. There's still not a lot in that.
Just a correction, Sam. I think the design has changed for the better, but I don't think it's still satisfactory for the site.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry for missing out that point, but that's what I meant in essence. I don't think, though, that actually gets to the crux of the matter in terms of explaining why the proposal is unacceptable for those things. What is it about that linear nature? What is it about that massing? What is it about that layout that is poor and causes that harm? What is it about that design cue that is unacceptable? And so that needs to be expanded on. The access issue, I think, is slightly dangerous territory. The outline application has been approved, and that would have taken into account the location of the site in relation to its surroundings. So issues in relation to access to the wider area, the development, and how anybody that lived on that site would gain access to services, schools, etc., is a matter of principle, as had already been covered. What could be considered is the internal layout of the scheme and how access might be poor in that respect. I don't have much of a comment unless that's expanded upon, but what I would say is that Sarah addressed during the discussion issues relating to levels, steps, that kind of thing. So if there are issues around pedestrian access and cycle access, they would have to be limited to why the internal layout of the scheme is proposed, because access to the scheme and the scheme's location in terms of its location in terms of the village and access to wider services is really a principal issue that's covered by the outline. And ecological assessment, I don't think any reasons were given in respect to why that was poor. So if that was going to be included, that would need to be expanded on. And I would just comment, like I have done previously when we found ourselves in this kind of situation, that it would be very helpful from my perspective if there was some kind of structure or framework to these recommendations when they were put forward, such that, like I said, the format should be along the lines of this particular feature of this scheme, and that can be a number of features, A, B, and C, causes harm, X, Y, Z, and there's a policy linked to that. That would be very helpful, but that's also lacking in this instance.
Right, okay. Just before you go on, I should have asked Councillor Kirby Green to sort of do the tail, if you like, and I'm going to ask you to do it, but if you could try and be tight on your response, and then we can come back to the point, Sam.
Thank you. I'll be very tight. I just wanted really to say to structure or make a suggestion as to why I think to help Councillor Barnes with why I think this should be refused. and that is that significant adverse effect on the High Weald area of outstanding natural beauty, including poor design in the context of the AONB. The proposed development does not represent a high quality response to the local context and landscape, and therefore be contrary to National Planning Policy Framework Powers 127 and 172, Forest Strategy 2014 policies OSS 4, RA1, CO2, EN1, EN3 and TR3, and Developing Site Allocations Local Plan Policy DEN1 and DEN2. The Council adopted the findings of Inspector Chamberlain and the decision of its Planning Committee of the 22nd of January 2019, when the Inspector and the Committee considered a similar scheme. And that, to me, I think we've talked about lots of other things. I also think biodiversity and ecology is an issue, but for me, that is the key reason, if I was a member of the committee, that I would be putting forward for refusing it. Sorry if I said that very quickly.
Thank you very much.
But I can certainly email it if you want it. Okay, thank you.
That's fine. And I'm just going to pick up on a comment. Councillor Prochak asked if Sam could just explain, which we've been asking for training on sometime, the AONB and the tilted balance in relation to, particularly in relation to paragraph 172 of the NPPF. Sam, would you just like to comment on that before you pick up on Eleanor's, Councillor Kirby Green's articulation of John Barnes's point?
Yes, okay, Chairman. Paragraph 11 in the tilted balance is not applied in the same way as it would if you were dealing with a full application or even an outline application. In this instance, we've got a reserve matters application before us. So the principle, if this development has already been approved, you are really focusing on the detailed design that's been put forward. And so in that respect, what you need to consider when it comes to things like paragraph 172 are what that paragraph requires you to consider in terms of the protection, being the conservation and essentially the enhancement of the AONB, and whether this development fulfills that or not. And if it doesn't, then it just needs to be articulated specifically about what this scheme doesn't do that. Whether or not you then bring in arguments about the tilted balance on a reserve matters application, I think would probably come down to whether or not there was a finely balanced issue to be made about those detailed aspects. But traditionally speaking, that's why it's a bit difficult to explain it in this context, you'd really be the tilted balance and whether a scheme should be approved is very much at the core of the decision-making process and about the principle of the development. So you'd really get into the nitty-gritty of that argument as part of an outline or full planning application, where, again, just to reiterate, in this instance, your starting point is that this has planning permission, this site, it's got an outline planning consent, and so the application is for the detail. So really, the specific reference to the paragraphs in the NPPF is about whether or not this scheme fulfills those requirements, rather than necessarily getting into the tilted balance argument.
So Sam, I think we all recognise it has outline for 30 houses, and it's not. I don't think anyone's contesting the 30 houses, despite sort of bits of discussion in there. The issue is one of how does the design and layout, how has the design and layout changed to have overcome the reason, and that was the reason for refusal of the inspector's report. And to me, it doesn't. It hasn't, from what people are saying. From what we look at, it's exactly the same line, the same more or less the same size and height, one way or the other, and therefore, 30. If he can fit 30, if the developer can fit 30 houses in some other way that doesn't have those impacts, then he's succeeded in bringing forward an application which overcomes the appeal inspector's decision. But he hasn't apparently done that, from what people are saying here. He has provided the same layout, houses of a different design, which people have acknowledged are improved, but still have issues about the potentially the more urban nature of them. Yes, they have added some some character in there, but I don't believe this has been this application has been looked at in detail by our AONB officer, and that's an issue. But the AONB High Weald AONB unit has clearly felt that these houses don't, and they're the ones who have ultimately brought the high wheel design guide to us. So we're not listening to the very people that we pay to give us advice on these matters. And I feel that this reserve matters application is trying to sort of push to the side the key issue, which the inspector clearly brought to the fore. He didn't actually talk in his decision, his final decision, about design itself. He recognised that it delivered housing. He says the proposed development would provide adequate living conditions for future occupants, acknowledged, as we all acknowledge, but it would harm the character and appearance of the area, including the A and B landscape. Therefore, the proposal would not accord with the development plan taken as a whole. There are no other considerations, including the framework, which outweigh the findings. So I think that's really what's being said here. And I think we're struggling really to get past that.
Chairman, can I make a couple of comments which may be helpful? I'm looking very much at paragraph 26 of the inspector's report, where he deals with paragraph 172. In refusing to allow this condition to be discharged, we're not saying this condition could never be discharged. What we're saying is that its massing, its scale, its layout really still breaches paragraph 172. In other words, what the inspector says in paragraph 26 isn't sufficiently mitigated by the design changes because the development is still, in all major respects, is an almost identical development, has to be because of the nature of the site. Secondly, the architect has not addressed the parking issue at all on site, and that provides the solution to that provides a particular hard edge to the site, and one which will be of major impact itself, quite apart from the housing on the AONB. On access, I listened very carefully to Sam. I was very careful to say, it seems to me we can't address vehicular access. The developer has not chosen to raise condition 16, but implied in condition 1 is also something about access, which I think is meant to cover not merely vehicular, but other forms of access. We've moved on a long way in terms of our approach to climate and biodiversity. It seems to me we are now a much greener in every respect, and planners themselves are moving on in these respects. And it seems to me that the biodiversity does need to be strengthened, but it does seem to me pedestrian access matters a lot more than it did in 2017 or 2006. Okay. And I don't think that has been satisfactorily addressed. It is implied, I would say, in condition 1.
Okay, I'll just, there are just two more things here. Councillor Meir has also raised the issue of accessibility to be considered, and you may want to add that in. And Councillor Drayson, Chairman of the Council, who has remained quiet to this point, but I think wants to say something. And so if I could just have that, and then we will see if somebody wants to second this and I think take a vote on it.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I mean, everything I've ever wanted to say, I've been writing pages. Someone said it before I got to it. But just a throwaway comment that you just made, but I just wanted to clarify. Just because a site has planning permission for dwellings not to exceed or shall not exceed 30 doesn't mean that they can never, ever be less than 30, does it?
No, it can be less than 30.
They seem to be hung up on this 30. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. I don't think we need to argue the point anymore. I think, Sam, I think I can't help but feel that you have enough. I think Councillor Kirby-Green, I think, articulated the policy references sufficiently well. So I think Councillor Project does one last comment. Go on.
Just a quick question. No, it's okay. Well, I'm not sure what Councillor John Barnes is actually moving. I mean, he's talking about conditions. he's seeking to remove conditions. I don't think we've ever done that before.
Could you just clarify the motion that you're moving? Are you refusing this whole reserved matters application on the points that the policy is already articulated?
I will leave it to the officers to advise on the exact wording. What I'm refusing to allow the developer to say that he has discharged conditions 1, 2, 3, and 7 to our satisfaction, and therefore those conditions should stand.
Okay, Mr. Batchelor, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, if it helps at all, we don't have to use that terminology about not discharging relevant conditions. This is an application for reserved matters that's brought about because of those conditions, but the reason for refusal can be traditional in some matters. There are bits of the scheme you don't like, and that's why the application is being refused. So we can forget about the reference to condition 1, 2, and 3 if that causing a particular issue. Similarly, because condition 7 was mentioned as well, and that's about drainage, we don't have to say, condition 7 isn't, we will ultimately end up saying that it's not discharged if that's what's voted on in due course. But there will just be a separate secondary reason for refusal about, what drainage aspects are found to be unacceptable, because I believe that's what condition 7 covers. So really, it's just about focusing on the elements of the scheme that are poor, with that policy reference. And then that can be the framework for a reason for refusal. Correct, yeah. And so, sorry, just to pick up very briefly, Councillor Vinehorn, what it was that you were helpfully trying to summarise for everybody. I completely accept that the view amongst some members appears to be that the development is extremely poor in this location because of its design. I'm just flagging up that in order for the scheme to be defensible, that I need something that's quite articulated quite clearly, so that although yes, I will have, there may well be a requirement for myself and Sarah to go through that and tweak it somehow, that in order for it to be defensible, it still needs to have some good hooks in terms of what about the layout, the massing, the scale of the scheme is poor, so that you could link those two things together. And similarly for those other issues, so the ecology, there's nothing being said about why that's poor. What's missing from what you understand about ecology so far, for example, that needs to be added into that? Because it's okay to say that the scheme impacts on the AONB because it has a poor layout and massing and scale, but it does, to be defensible, it does need to be a bit more, it does need to be more detailed.
Sam, I think we can be very clear here. The mass and the change in the landform has not changed materially from the layout and mass of the previous application and dismissed at appeal, and the reason is precisely for the same reason as given by the inspector, which is a high bar to jump over. And I don't think in any way it's been this application has jumped over that bar. It's as simple as that. I don't think you have to go to any deeper level than that.
All I would comment is
I think the policy references were articulated very well by Councillor Kirby Green. I'm sort of don't really know where to go. I mean, we're not going to say we don't like the verandas or the bricks or something like that, or the fenestrations, because there's not sufficient detail there anyway. It is sufficient to say that this application has not changed in the size or the area taken to materially make a difference from what was refused.
I agree with that. I also, Chairman, take on board Councillor Kirby Green's point. I do want to add to them the one about the linear shape of the parking on site and the fact that it's on the edge of the site on a built-up bank of the stream. All of those I find unacceptable, so I would add those, Councillor Kirby Green. Sam has raised a question about biodiversity. Can I point out that our advisors, the county ecologist and the Highwell unit, have both drawn attention to gaps in what the applicant has said. I would recommend that Sam looks at what they've said about gaps, and particularly there is an appendix to the Highwell evidence which spells out why they think that is inadequate. I am very happy to go along with our high-wheeled advisors on that, but I do point out that under the 2006 Act, we have a duty to secure the enhancement of biodiversity. Mitigating it is not enough.
I think I do have to feel, Sam, that there is more than enough there. And then you have the further comments on the, if you want on the specific design, as Councillor Prochak has raised in the chat, on the tightly spacing of them, which is more akin to a high street, but it's the overall mass at the end of the day that is the result. So they haven't come back with anything which is materially different. They've changed the frontal design, but the actual area and the mass of the layout is just not changed. And in fact, it's highlighted the change in the landform, because by raising the land at the bottom, you've taken a valley and turned it into an abrupt cliff, really, and that is changing the form of the AONB, which they can't avoid doing because of the nature of the slope. But that doesn't, and digging out the side of the bank, that is changing the form of the AONB, and that's not about views; it's about the very nature of it. I can't help but feel you have more than enough there to articulate the what you want to write up as the formal reasoning.
I'm happy to go over a draft with the officers, Chairman. They're clearly having a struggle.
What I'm going to suggest is this. So it's struggling a bit here, and I don't want it to struggle any further. I'm going to suggest that we have, because we need a break anyway, it's taken a long time. I'm going to suggest that Councillor Barnes, with Councillor Prochak and Sam Batchelor, Sarah and myself, we adjourn this meeting 15 minutes, and we're going to have a discussion in another room. Okay, so those of us doing that will have to leave the meeting. Sam, if you can start that other meeting up, and we will recommence in at 20 to 1. All right, so have a break at that time. If those other members could.
Point of order, Chair. Sorry to interrupt. Can I just clarify whether that's allowed, given that surely planning decisions have to be made within the public's view?
No, it's absolutely allowed to adjourn the meeting for officers to have a discussion with the proposing member to find a way to articulate this. It's absolutely normal practice.
Thank you. My apologies.
And it's set out in the guidance. So, Sam, can you just send a link to those to the four of us, yeah? And I will, and everyone else have a little bit to break till 22, and don't leave the meeting. Just turn your things off. But I will be. We will have to leave and then come back again. All right. This is recommencing the planning meeting and the application RR 20201822/P, and I'm going to ask the officers to re-articulate the reasons that the committee had been expressing, and then I'm going to ask if there's somebody who wishes to second the proposal put forward by Councillor Barnes as articulated by the officers. Do I have Sarah or Sam?
Yes. Okay. It seems to be, as you say, primarily the concerns that this scheme will not enhance or conserve the AONB landscape, that it will result in changes to the landforms of the site, which will be generated by the layout of the parking and the housing development. You have concerns about the massing, scale and height, the tight spacing of that, the fact that you've considered the design has taken the wrong cues from the high street rather than cues from the more rural edges of the village, and that the parking along the edge would be inappropriate in its position and build up and would be highly visible and detrimental to the landscape. And you've specified paragraphs from the National Planning Framework as well as policies from the core strategy and the DASA.
All right, thank you very much. So that is articulated. And do we have somebody who wishes to second that motion? Do we have somebody who wishes to second that motion, please?
I'm happy to second it.
Yes.
We have two seconders. We have Councillor Gandy put his name up first, so I'll take the second from Councillor Gandy. So Julie, can I hand it over to you to ask for a? This is so if you're voting, you're voting to. This is a vote to refuse. So if you say yes, you're refusing the application. Yeah. Julie.
Okay, members, I'll call your names in alphabetical order. If you can say for, against or abstain. Councillor John Barnes.
Voting to refuse.
Councillor Mrs Barnes.
Refuse.
Councillor Coleman.
Against.
Councillor Curtis.
Refuse.
Councillor Errington.
For refusal.
Councillor Ganley.
Refuse.
Councillor Harmer.
Refuse.
Councillor Johnson.
Refuse.
Councillor Madeley.
Refuse.
Councillor Mear.
Refuse.
Councillor Norton.
Refuse.
Councillor Prochak.
For refusal.
Councillor Tempe.
For refusal.
And Councillor Vinehall.
For refusal.
That's refused then, Chairman.
Thank you very much. You've had a break, so we will go on to the next application, which is RR 2020-1922/P 6 Mountfield Villas, Hoath Hill, Mountfield. I'm not sure who's presenting this.
That's me, Chairman.
No.
You just have to bear with me once we get the screen share set up. Sorry about the delay.
That's all right.
Right, hopefully we can see that.
We can.
Indeed, right, okay. So this is a planning application for a two-storey side extension, single-storey re-extension and internal alterations at number 6 Mountfield Villas. Planning permission was previously granted for development of this site for a two-storey extension. The scheme is currently being built out. However, the scheme that's being built out is not in accordance with the approval. And so this is a retrospective application in order to actually deal with it as built, which you'll note from your report quotes the dimensions. Essentially, the two-storey extension is being built wider than approved originally. So this is the floor layout of the proposed development. This here is the rear extension. This is the two-storey side extension element of the first floor there. These are the elevations of that. So you've got a semi-detached property, the original property here, the extension from the front, view from the rear, view from the side. And then these are just plans showing the scheme as previously approved. It's a bit difficult because they're not side by side, but I'm sure that you can appreciate if I just quickly flip back to the as proposed elevations now that this looks narrower. You can tell that there. If I quickly go back, you can probably see that that appears to be a bit wider there. So it's not considered that the change results in any material harm either to the character of the area or to nearby neighbours. So the recommendation is for approval. Oh, and sorry, just before I finish, there's also a photo just to show you the scheme in context to the site boundary.
There you are. Good, thank you very much. Thank you. We've got Councillor Kirby and Barnes call this in, so would Councillor Kirby Green want to comment on this?
Yes, I want to apologise really that I've called this in as well as the previous one. The reasons for calling this in is really that the parish council had long discussions about this when the original application came in, about whether it was intrusive to the neighbouring property, and the conversations were that it was really pushing the boundaries, but okay, they would support it, or they wouldn't support refusal. Sorry. As it's been built, obviously it's now bigger than it was going to be. So I think the feeling is that actually it was pushing the boundaries anyway. And now by retrospectively applying for a little bit bigger, it's a little bit, it's too big and it's too intrusive. I can't really say much more than that. It's unfortunate you can't do site visits because I think this is one really that would have benefited from you looking at it. I think it's really difficult. I mean, I've seen it, but looking at there, it doesn't look quite like it does in reality. The only thing I can say is that the two people that the report makes much of aren't affected by it at all. So two people in favour of this are not affected by the development. It's the neighbour next door who is, and I think the parish council had great sympathy with them and really wanted to flag that they wouldn't have supported this had these dimensions been in the original application. I think it's unfortunate that we're in a situation where we've got a retrospective planning permission because unfortunately the development hasn't followed the original planning application, but I can't really say any more than that without you seeing it. I'm sorry if it's wasting your time bringing this to you, but I was asked by neighbours and the the parish council to bring it to you.
Thank you very much.
We're all a bit weary after that last application, so I'm so sorry.
There you go. Thank you very much, Councillor Barnes.
I think Councillor Kirby Green has said it all. I think in principle, what we're being asked to do is objectionable. I always find retrospective planning permissions very difficult, and particularly difficult where what has happened is we've approved one set of plans and then there has been a departure from the plans. In this particular instance, I have to say, I don't think the departure is sufficiently significant to take enforcement action. But I think the parish council are right to raise the issue of principle. And I do find this a somewhat objectionable practice, which happens all too frequently. That said, I don't find myself, and I do know the site, I don't find this is really raising major problems of principle. If that had been before us as the original planning application, I doubt if we would have refused it.
Thank you very much, John. Are there any other members who wish to speak on this application? In which case, does anyone want to propose the recommendation, which is for to grant the planning permission? Does anyone want to propose anything else? Councillor Barnes, Mary Barnes. Councillor Prochak. Are you proposing this, Councillor Prochak?
Yes, and move approval.
Moving for approval. Do we have anyone second?
And I'll second that.
Second.
I'll second that.
Thank you very much. So can we have a vote, please, Julie?
Okay, members, I'll call your names in alphabetical order. If you can say for, against or abstain. Councillor John Barnes.
Abstain.
Councillor Mrs Barnes.
For.
Councillor Coleman.
For.
Councillor Curtis.
For.
Councillor Burrington.
For.
Councillor Ganley.
For.
Councillor Harmer.
For.
Councillor Johnson.
For.
Councillor Madeley.
Against.
Councillor Mear.
Abstain.
Councillor Norton.
For.
Councillor Projek.
For.
Councillor Tempe.
Against.
And Councillor Vinehall.
For.
That's carried, Chair.
Thank you very much. Moving right along to item 9, which is R 2019-2618/P, Galley Hill Foreshore. And it looks like Sam is presenting this.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Application for beach huts on the beach, funnily enough, down at Galley Hill, end of Bexhill. So this is the site plan showing the general location. This is the road that leads up to Galley Hill here, the children's play area, and then you'll go down the hill again, and you may well be familiar that there are other beach huts further along the beach there. This is just the individual plots for the beach huts. And again, just because of lack of a site visit, which wouldn't necessarily be necessary in this instance, a bit of context for you. So the beach huts would be generally located along this. Sorry, you probably can't see my pointer, can you?
No.
No.
There we go.
Yeah, we can see it now.
Yeah, generally be located in the vicinity there. So the cliff edge is there, got a bit of kind of bank there, and they'll be along here. And then we also have just some general information about the modest design of the beach huts, which are essentially simple wooden structures. So the recommendation is approval for a temporary planning permission.
Councillor Tempe, do you want to make any comment on this? This is your area.
Yeah, I'm not sure this sits well in this location. I do know there's a need for huts to be rented. I just want to be sure that because that is actually the Coombe Valley Country Park area, isn't it? So I want to be sure that they're aware of this.
Are they aware of this, Sam?
Not that I could answer. I have to presume not. They're not a consultee on the planning application.
No.
The Country Park is the Countryside Park is an organisation, but obviously I appreciate that we are a member of that as an authority.
Mm. Yeah, I have mixed views at the moment. I'd be interested in hearing what my colleagues have to say.
Okay, Councillor Errington.
Yeah, my question is to Sam, really. I'm trying to remember. It's a long time since I've walked along there. There is a footpath, isn't there, from the bottom of Galley Hill all the way to the sort of first set of beach huts. So would the beach huts be behind that footpath, i.e. set into against the cliff? So if you were walking to Ravenside, they would be on your left as you walked along, rather than on your right.
If you walk into Ravenside. I'm not familiar with the footpath you're describing, but yes, they would be set against the cliff. The footpath that I'm familiar with is obviously the paved one that goes up to the to Galley Hill itself and then down behind Ravenside.
Yeah, but you can go one way and come back the other. So
I see. To go around the loop on the beach.
Yeah, so I wonder if Councillor Timper knows the path that I'm talking about. Does anybody?
Yeah, I know the path, and it's used constantly by dog walkers, and I think one of the objections raised, the fact that would that cause a major issue with the beach hut people, with people trundling by all the time, because they're not going to be any sort of barrier or any sort of place for where the dogs might not go. I mean, I'm just concerned about its location. That's my concern.
Okay. But it's a similar location to, say, the western side, isn't it, where people are walking, possibly not right in front. Yeah, I know what you mean.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a wall, isn't there? There's a significant barrier.
Yeah.
So
I see it now.
Councillor Drayson.
Yes, thank you. Yes, having fallen over on that path before, yes, there is a path at the bottom of the cliff, and that would be. I'd be very interested to know if it's proposed if they're going to be in front or behind, because it's very strange. But I just don't see the need. I don't see the need when we have beach huts. I declare an interest. I've hired one for the last 2 years from a local company, But I don't see, we've got beach huts from the Sovereign Light Cafe all the way through almost to Galley Hill. And I don't see the need for one bit of unspoilt beach we have left that we need to stick 20 huts on there. So I just don't see the need.
Okay. And you had a question to officers there, didn't you, regarding whether the path was in front or behind? Is that the question?
Yes. That was, yeah.
Sam?
Sorry, Chairman, but I don't have that detail. It's not something that I was familiar with. I'd be surprised if the applications were put onto the footpath if it's a known usable footpath. So I suspect that they'd probably be put adjacent to it. I suspect the footpath follows the line of the cliff at the bottom. And so, I mean, I can show. It's difficult because I can just help.
Can I just help? I believe that they're actually going to be, as you're walking towards Ravenside, the sea is on your right, the beach huts are on your left, away from the path, but nearer the cliff. But it's quite right. It is an unspoilt piece of area along the shore. So.
Okay. Councillor Harmer.
Thank you. My question is regarding the colour, believe it or not, whether this is agreed or not agreed. But generally, we have a rule that everything is white. And I would like to ask, at what point can we discuss a bit of colour? Thank you.
All right. Well, that's a question for another day, I suspect. Councillor Madeley.
Thank you, Chair. I have no objection to it in principle. And I also feel that we do need. I disagree with Councillor Drayson on this, that there's a greater need for more beach huts on the seafront, and that's what the seafront's all about. My concern is the fact that they are being placed fairly far from any public conveniences. Unlike rather the other ones, which are the other side of what we call the bridge or the tunnel, which is fairly near to Lewes there. These proposed ones are quite a distance, as far as I'm aware, from either public conveniences on either side. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Barnes.
Yes, I studied these with some interest. I was brought up on the coast of Cornwall, and of course beach huts were very much part of our upbringing. Sorry, I've got an echo from somewhere, I'm not sure why. But they were used for a rather different purpose. These are rather small. When you went down on a Cornish beach and you had a beach hut, you used it to make tea, to picnic. These seem to me only of a size which would allow the changing of a costume. And I'm not sure really whether we're actually making, and I take it this is rather the district council proposal, which is why we've got it, whether we're actually making the right proposal. I also share some of the concerns about them being on the other side of a well-used path, and it is a rather unspoilt bit of Bexhill. In fact, cliffs are rather rare. I'll take the statement that we need more beach huts as being a local opinion. I can't pronounce on that, but I have to say I have some doubts about this particular proposal, whether the type of huts which will really be well used and whether they're in the right place.
Can't hear you, Jonathan.
Speakers off, sorry. Councillor, yes, there you go. You can now. Yes, please, Councillor Project.
Oh, thank you.
The typing.
We know, I mean, it's a rather district council application, and we know why this application has come forward, because it's a way of making quite a lot of income for Rother, but that's not what we have to consider today. And I just wondered, Chair, whether, I mean, I think there's been a slippage on that cliff recently. Is it worth deferring this for us to have a look at?
That sounds like a good idea. There are quite a few members who aren't familiar with this site at all. I'm not familiar with this site. And you know, several issues have been raised. One in terms of are there too many? I don't know if the application has considered the need in relation to that. You know, what is the aspect of the in relation to the undeveloped section of beach? So there are a few issues that seem to be raised. If you wanted to put forward a motion of deferral so we could actually see it, then we could see how that appeals to the committee. There do seem to be some differences of opinion.
Thank you. I'm happy to move deferral if that. I'm happy to move that.
Is there another member who'd like to second that? There's a second from Councillor Harmer and Madeley. Julie, could you take a vote on that? We'd like to defer this application so that the committee could actually see the site, because I think the feeling is that there isn't enough knowledge about the location and how it impacts on both the path and just the beauty of the area.
Okay, members, I'll call your names out in alphabetical order. Again, if you can say for, against or abstain. So Councillor John Barnes.
Defer.
Councillor Mrs Barnes.
Defer.
Councillor Coleman.
For deferral.
Councillor Percy.
For.
Councillor Harrington.
For deferral.
Councillor Ganley.
For.
Councillor Palmer.
For deferral.
Councillor Johnson.
For deferral.
Councillor Madeley.
For deferral.
Councillor Mear.
For deferral.
Councillor Horton.
Defer.
Councillor Mrs Brocher.
For deferral.
Councillor Tempe.
Reluctantly defer.
And Councillor Vinehall.
Defer.
That's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you very much. That sounded like something out of the Mikado. So I'll move straight on to the appeals, and this report is for noting. Does anyone wish to ask any questions of any of the appeals that are noted on here? I know that there are none that have been allowed, so well done to the officers for defending those, and 2 that have been dismissed. So anyone have any questions on those? It doesn't appear to be anything terribly controversial. No? On that no? Good. On that basis, I'll move to item. If we can just, we don't have to take a vote on that, do we, Julie? Just.
No, Chairman, as it's just for noting, that's fine.
Thank you. And finally, to note the date and time for the next site visit, which is the 9th of March 2021 at 8:30. Then we'll be deciding on the whole COVID situation then as well. And I'd like to thank everyone for their discussion today. I recognise it was a very difficult application this morning, and sometimes emotions are raised a little bit, but I think we can all be mature enough to walk away from any comments that might have been made that were not intended. So thank you very, very much for that. And Claire, if I could ask members just to stay on for a moment, and Claire, if you could finish the video.